Peter will wander in.
Recording in progress.
Good morning. Welcome to the Thursday, March 6, 2025 Palo Alto Architectural Review Board hearing. We have Peter running a couple minutes late, but I think that it's okay to go ahead and get started, and he will join us as soon as he is able to. So can we please get a roll call?
Chair Rosenberg,
Present.
Vice Chair Chen,
Present.
Board Member Adcock,
Present.
Board Member Hirsch.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. And then we'll note on the record when Peter does arrive. Thank you. At this time, we open the floor for public comment. This is to the public for anyone who'd like to speak on an item not on the agenda. If you would like to speak about an agendized item, there will be time for that later in this meeting. Each public speaker will have 3 minutes to talk. Do we have any comment cards or raised hands?
I have no requests to speak.
Okay, perfect. We will close the public comment session for today, and we'll go on to agenda changes, additions, and deletions for this meeting.
No changes.
Okay. Beautiful. All right, I guess we're going to dive into city official reports unless we have something, there's nothing new added. We want to talk about the March 20th meeting. Oh, and we have Peter join us. Perfect timing. So before we get to the action items, the city official reports would be ready to go. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. Well, good morning to our fourth meeting of the year. We do have some upcoming and recently submitted items that are detailed in the packet. So those are also on the screen. So just going through those, there is a study session planned for this next upcoming meeting for the California Avenue signage. So that will be in coordination with the city manager's office, and they will be preparing and submitting for the architectural review board's review some signage options and trying to solicit some feedback on the signage. Also is a De La Rosa exterior upgrades that also will be at that hearing, and following the hearing there will be an ad hoc for the 164 Hamilton Avenue facade modifications.
And Stephen, do you know who's sitting in on that ad hoc?
Pardon?
Do you know who's sitting in on that ad hoc?
To my knowledge,
If you're not
No,
meant
but-
to be a pop quiz, just
Yeah.
want to give my fellow people a heads up.
we can figure that out and report.
That'd be great. Thank you.
And as for the recently submitted items, so we have a exterior upgrade for the former Terrain Cafe that is detailed in the packet on the pending projects, as well as a preliminary ARB for 540 University.
Okay.
And let's see here. We do have some planned absences on the 19th. So if there are any other planned absences, please direct that to either my attention or Veronica's. Moving along for some.
Could you please add my name on 19th as well, June 19th? I will not be here.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair Chen.
And I might not be here as well, so maybe that means we don't have a quorum.
Correct.
Well,
And I'll jump in and say that it may be that we'll try and cancel that meeting, given that it is Juneteenth, but especially if it looks like we won't have a quorum.
Perfect. Okay.
Thank you. And as for some updates, further updates, we are working with the chair and vice chair, coordinating some of the background efforts, if you will, for the ARB awards. We do have a tentative date in mind. We're still, it's not an official date yet, but that is, we're shooting for May 29th at 5 to 7 p.m. We do have an item that we would like to discuss at this time, and I'll turn the floor over to Claire.
So just two quick items before I speak. In response to the 164 Hamilton, the ad hoc committee will be Rosenberg and Adcock, sorry. Sorry, can you go back to the report?
Thank you for that. Appreciate the heads up.
And I just was going to note, if the board members could just let us know if that date and time is, you're going to be available, it would be helpful. We'd love to obviously make sure that everybody can attend that if we can, so. And with that, I wanted to speak a little bit to 824 San Antonio. This was a project that was approved by the board, and the board recommended that it return for an ad hoc committee. As we prepared the approval letter in discussions with our legal counsel, they indicated to us that it would not be in conformance with state law to have the applicant come back for a discretionary action related, such as an ad hoc committee for a housing development project. And so I wanted to just explain what was done for this project. The director did issue a decision letter. We did ask the applicant to make changes to align with items that board members had requested. And so I wanted to give a quick summary on those, and give me just 1 second. I'll share my screen. So the first item was modifying the conditions of approval to say that they can't do public art on the front facade. We confirmed that we can't prohibit or limit how they place or design their public art, especially if the placement was approved by the Public Arts Commission. However, we did add the following condition to the approval letter. And this really just aligns with the language that's already in our code. And it says that if the public art substantially modifies the front facade in a manner that the director determines will significantly alter the character or appearance of the building or site, such as by enclosing the proposed screen, it shall be subject to additional architectural review. So it's really just saying that, if you are making modifications to this project in a way that really doesn't align with the approved plans, then you can propose a new project, which would then be subject to the Architectural Review Board's review. Item 2 was the ad hoc asked to consider the pattern of the equitone panels. There was this kind of weird, awkward diagonal on them. They did change that to just a standard rectangular vertical pattern on the design before we approved the plans. The board recommended the ad hoc review window and exterior door size and configuration on the rear facade, mainly. Oops, I'm sorry. I think I copy pasted the wrong ones. This is the rear of the building, and I think it was really, if you could see my cursor, this small window and the window here that was a little bit awkwardly placed. So we had them revise that in the design before we approved the project. They also asked to have a consistent residential balcony railing material. So some of the balconies were metal, some of them had glass. They did revise everything so that they're all glass, so you can see on this facade and on this that everything has been redesigned to have glass and no metal. The last one, the ad hoc, the board recommended that the ad hoc consider access doors between the dining room and the rear yard. The applicant expressed that this was not viable for their programming due to safety concerns. And so the board was generally split on this during the hearing, and we did not make them make changes to address this item. And with that, I just want to turn it back to you. We can't launch into a discussion about this project, but I wanted to, publicly make the board aware of what was done for this project. Happy to have any further discussions with, if any individual members have questions about this or would like to talk with, our staff further on that.
Claire, thank you so much for the report. I mean, typically we don't have sort of a summary of the ad hoc, and this was excellent because this was a sort of larger series of agenda items for them to discuss. And just knowing that they can't come back, that's fine. So we understand the legality of it, and just getting a full summary was perfectly helpful. So thanks very much. Really appreciate it.
May I ask a question or two?
Yeah.
The questions are allowed.
Especially if it's focused on kind of the process
On the
rather than
content of what you said, not about the project
Yeah,
itself. That I
no,
understand.
absolutely. That'd be,
So at a specific level, the board was concerned that public art was being proposed as part of the architectural design, and our strong concern was that it not be considered public art if it's integrated into the building's architecture. It sounds to me like that's not the determination staff made. Is that correct?
That would be correct, yeah.
Okay. Chair, were we aware of this in advance? This is a big deal.
No, this is a big deal. This is something that I don't believe we were aware of in advance. However, if it is being pulled up by code, right? If the Arts and Boards Commission, and if you don't mind going back to that slide where you showed that, and you had cited the code where that is, then that's something that's well worth noting.
I'm going to more than note, I just plain protest against that. I think that's wrong to have done it that way. My second comment or question to you is, what I'm hearing is that anytime we have an ad hoc committee for a review that's related to a residential project, that's not going to be permitted?
so we are going to strongly recommend that ad hoc not be used for housing projects because of the result of consultation on this one. That really working to focus on crafting specific conditions of approval as much as possible, rather than relying on future review by ad hoc, will be advisable for
Okay,
housing projects.
That's a
Absolutely.
process the staff has just become aware of. So
Right.
it's something we could hold you to for that past project.
And yeah, and for the comment on the public art, we did hear your concerns in that discussion and worked to put as strong a condition as possible in acknowledgement of that. But again, we hear
Yeah,
your
bluntly
comments
speaking,
today.
you would not have received our recommendation of approval to go to ad hoc if that had been the case with the public art. So I hope you really understand my sense of just didn't work. So thank you.
Can we,
I have
sorry
a
to jump in.
comment.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what will happen in the process then? What will we see? In other words, what is the process going to lead to the presentation of the face of the building then to us?
For future
So-
projects, David?
Yeah, so for that project, staff will be responsible for ensuring that it's not significantly different in opinion or in appearance than what you saw, because we did add that additional condition,
Yeah,
correct?
but there
Claire?
was no description of the public art. So what you're saying is talking out of both sides of your mouth. You can't have it that way.
So there was something put in place, there was something in the diagrams. And so if it looks significantly different than the metal screen that was shown in those diagrams, then it may need to return as a new project.
And my understanding was the concern was mainly that, that they would be changing it in a way that potentially would substantially enclose, which would very much change the design and the architecture of the project.
Well, and that it would substantially change the appearance of the facade since it's such a notable
Right.
portion of the facade. So the
Projects.
grant, the sort of long and the short of this is that if they match what they was shown and what we sort of reviewed and approved, then they're good to go. If they try and do a dramatic shift, it's going to be a
Mhm.
problem.
Yeah.
That's sort of the end of it.
Yeah, and I would say too that, they have to come back to the Public Arts Commission for the final design. So typically when that happens, if there was an interest on the board, which I assume there would be in this case, normally we would reach out and have a representative of the Architecture Review Board be at that, be invited to comment on that design so that the Public Arts Commission had that in mind when they're making their decision.
If
Board
I
Member
may,
Adcock.
So-
yeah,
Board
sorry.
Member Adcock had something.
Sorry, just two questions. First question is this, the language that we're seeing on the screen, already being issued as approval? So there's no editing the language?
Correct.
Okay. And
Why?
well, I do take exception to the description of significantly alter the character. True, that's exactly what our concern is. However, the concern was not just about enclosing the proposed screen. That is an extreme drastic, and that changes the square footage and all of that, right? That was not exactly our concern. It is the appearance of the exterior with the, the terracotta color and the patterning. Those are all lovely, but that's not what's going to happen, right? So I don't think our concern is purely about enclosure. I know it's stated as an example, but that kind of gives you a sense of what would be considered significant alteration, which I don't think is quite what we intended.
So
That
you'd take objection to a color change and you would consider that significant where this language doesn't necessarily support that a color change would be significant?
I would say color change may not be quite so significant, but instead of vertical pattern, it is starburst pattern or something else. I would consider that a significant change that changes the look of that building. But when the example is it enclosed? No, a starburst or whatever pattern could still be open, but a significant change in the look of the building. So I do take exception to that, but seems like this ship has sailed.
Well, and I would also just completely support your point there. I would just say that we'll rely on staff and their expertise to follow up on this project, as we know that this is sort of a touchy one.
Right.
So I would just ask that staff sort of understands where the ARB sits and their definition of significant.
And I would say that the language doesn't preclude us from considering other such
Agreed.
changes significant, so.
Thank you.
I have one comment to the description of the process, and that is you would look to, say, the chairman to come and look at it and say, is it okay? I think that the board should be seeing the whole thing at some point, and then we would have an opportunity to comment to the chairman if we personally have a problem with that. Could we change the process that way?
No, the public art is subject to the Public Arts Commission's purview. But again, if the language we added aligns with the language in the code, and so if we think it's substantially different from what was presented to you, then we can require them to file an architectural review application and, have that change considered.
So really, what you're saying is that you're going to make the decision, basically. And that the board as a whole, is not going to see whatever that decision was made by the art commission.
The determination is made by the director. So yes, the determination as to whether it's a significant change, as with any project that comes to the board for recommendation,
Yep.
if changes are made, the final determination as to whether a change is considered significant is made by the director.
With the advice of the ARB, typically by statute. This is without the advice of the ARB. There's
Well,
a big difference there.
it is with the advice of the ARB for the front end, right? It's
Not anymore, it's not. I mean, this
Not
is
anymore.
after the fact. That's a big difference.
So we hear your concerns, but the determination as to whether a change, for example, something that comes up during a building permit process on a project previously approved by ARB, sometimes there are minor changes. And sometimes those are ones that we do consult with members of the ARB, the chair or vice chair on it. There are some that are determined by the director without consultation with the ARB.
This is not an unusual process.
This is not unusual, correct?
I mean, when chair, and was discussing with Jody
No,
of
hang on.
a color of a building facade, a slight change in the facade, and together the process, it was to expedite a decision so that, you know, the contractor can move ahead and the project can get completed, et cetera. But it was a very minor item. This one, the board as a whole, I think, thinks this is pretty significant or could be very significant. And the process in this case ought to follow regulations.
So here's sort of my, comment on this whole thing is we're sort of arguing for something that hasn't even happened yet, right? We don't know if this applicant is going to come in and say, I want to change this. They might come in and have exactly the same screen, in which case there is no issue and this whole
No
conversation
issue.
is moot. So I think if I may say this pretty bluntly, is that the ARB is pretty clear. We like the way it's designed. If they change it, we want the director to understand to us that is a significant change period. Unless it's like a very minor color or like the gap size varies from like a quarter of an inch to an eighth, right? Like those are obviously minor. But if there's a substantial notable change, I think that what we're trying to get at here is that the ARB is pretty clear. We like the design as it was. We approve it as it is and understand there's a legal issue here, right? We can't bring it back. We would just like to make a very strong, bold note that any change to the screen should be taken as pretty major by the director. So if we can make that note, I think that we can move forward from this conversation. Now, the one thing I would like to say, or actually ask, is that we have a lot of overlap between art and architecture, right? And so my sort of overall comment in this is that it's what point is it public art and at what point is it just part of the facade? And in this project, it's very much on the line, right? This is not clearly a painting. It's not clearly a mural. Right? It is an integrated part of the architecture. And that's, I think, why we're also being a little bit extra ferocious about it, is that this is part of the facade of the building. If you take it off, it's a completely different building. So it's not like adding a sculpture in front of the building. It is an integrated part. And so to call it public art is a little bit not sitting right with me. But again, that was a conversation for when it was in front of us as the board to begin with. So that ship has somewhat sailed. But I think moving forward, we just need to be very clear when public art is art and when architecture is architecture. And this is one of those that a screen on a building, it's part of the architecture. So calling it public art is just a little bit not sitting well with me, but
A lot
Again,
not sitting well with me.
that ship
It
is some-
is not public. art, it
correct,
is
but this
architecture.
is,
And they've set a precedent. Now, next time I'm doing a building in town, sure, I'm going to call my facade public art, get all the benefits from that. And this has been established now. I can do this.
but we should have had this conversation more ferociously at the last
They
meeting.
should have brought the project back to the ARB instead of just pushing it through. The intent of the ARB going to ad hoc was to push this through, not to allow this to happen. When the legal staff tells you you can't do that process,
Right.
the right choice is to come back to the ARB to make our recommendation in whole. Chair, we should have been aware of this and it should have been done that way. I don't see any other way to not establish this precedent, which is what we were really concerned about.
When this project was in front of us, how much of a conversation did we have in regards to this screen being public art versus not
A
public
lot.
art?
Quite a bit.
A
It was a
lot,
big,
yeah.
it was a
Okay.
heated discussion.
Okay.
I remember being quite focused on that.
And when we made our ad hoc decisions, we as a board chose to move this forward, didn't we?
Yes, because the rest of these items are relatively trivial and we're more than happy to let whatever process takes its place for designing the windows and the consistency of the railings.
Yeah,
That-
exactly.
That's perfectly fine.
Yeah, we have to, I think you really have to say that those were good decisions and improved the back of the building significantly and were very appropriate. And it's fine to see that sort of process that worked at that point. But I think you get the sense that everybody here thinks that the front of the building is really, really significant. And something like this could, you could well imagine that somehow or other the art commission could get together with us. And we could have some part of the process, and it doesn't satisfy rules and regulations necessarily, but it could be accomplished.
I guess my question is, moving forward, how do we, as a board, make an accurate and viable determination on when it's art and when it's architecture?
Yeah. I think we all agree that this is part of
As
architecture.
part of the building.
And if I could tack on a question, follow-up question to that for city to respond is, what is the process for public art to be part of the building? And I bring that up because on one of my projects for the city, that was a question that came up, which basically made it so we couldn't really do public art because of the timing and the process of the public art approval, which this project, like from what I heard from the public arts staff, did not match what's going on with this project. So I would just like some clarification for the board of what is that process versus the ARB process in terms of timing, so that we don't, we're not up against the wall like this again.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say right now, like, also, this is not intended to be a pop quiz for you guys, right? We understand that this might need to have, you guys might need to go back and talk with legal and set up some parameters for this. But I think that the if I may speak for the board, is that the overarching theme here is that I think pretty much everybody behind this side of the desk thinks that those screens are part of the architecture and should never have been considered public art. And again, knowing where we are now, we accept that, we move on, right? At least I do. I'm not sure Peter does. I don't want to speak for him on that front. But moving forward with future projects, when we see something like this, we as a board will be pretty clear to say, that's not art, that's part of the architecture. And so just knowing that there's going to be future pushback on that, because this is not a precedent we want to set that for this city, that somebody designs some metal fins and calls it public art. It's not, it's part of the building. And in any other project, this would be part of the architecture, but
Yeah, so I mean, I can just speak to the fact that to board member Adcock's question about timing, they are required to go before the Public Arts Commission prior to approval of the project to get approval of kind of the location of the art and generally what they're thinking about in terms of, you know, ideas of materials or like, are you looking at a mural or are you thinking about a statue kind of thing? Not detailed, but it's primarily about the location. So they did go to the Public Arts Commission and get approval on that location. I will say that the Public Arts team did make it very clear that there are only certain benefits that they are going to get out of calling that public art. They are only going to be able to get a cost differential of what it would cost to do the panels in some way that's not architecturally designed or designed by an artist. And then anything that they kind of add to that is like the cost that they're covering. So they are probably going to have to pay in lieu fees for a certain portion. And so ultimately, when it comes around, they may choose to just do what is proposed without kind of calling it a public art component, depending on how they coordinate that with the artist. So
yeah, that actually, on that conversation, I have a bit of a question. If they go to, you know, I'm not going to say a company and just say, okay, we're going to order design A 2.5. Is that art? Right. And that becomes a much more philosophical question for maybe the Arts Commission board. But like, we also liked what we saw, and that might be something that is off the shelf. And so then at that point, because we as the ARB decided we liked what was there and now they have to comply with that, is that actually public art if they're just buying it off the shelf? It's a bigger philosophical discussion.
Yeah.
But the point is that when it's integrated this closely with the architecture of the building, I think we just need to be very careful, and that we should have a conversation with the Arts Commission as well to say art is art and architecture is architecture. And yes, they do mush sometimes. This one feels pretty clearly like it's architecture. So unless they had hired an artist and it was like spinning and decorative and colorful, I mean, then you get it, it's art, right? But this one's a tricky one. So to Peter's point, I really don't want to set a precedent that anyone coming into the city can just throw up some screens and call it art. So that would be my concern.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Rosenberg. I think your summary was very helpful. I think we've all learned from this experience. It was clearly an edge case and will help with the process with other projects moving forward, both in terms of how we discuss these projects and where public art is committed to or not. So thank you. This is why it was important to come back and report out on this.
Yes, and appreciated for the summary that Claire provided. We don't typically have a review of an ad hoc, and actually I do quite appreciate it. So even with some of the smaller ones, it might be helpful to come back in the future at this sort of same time in the meeting and say, you know, we had this ad hoc, everything was good to go moving forward. And it can be a 2-minute thing, but I think that it is sort of helpful for the other ARB members to understand that the ad hocs have been completed and successfully. And understand that this is somewhat of a tricky project. We're going to move forward because that's basically where we're at right now, is that we have to. Making sure that our commentary to the director is loud and clear. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything else for our city official reports?
No further items.
Okay, perfect. Then we will move on to action item number 2, which is, I'm going to read it. The ad hoc committee report for the review of ad hoc committee report on objective standards for townhomes and provide direction to staff. So I'm going to flip to the page and read it in full. The ad hoc committee report, review ad hoc committee report on objective standards for townhomes and provide direction to staff. The recommendation is to review the ad hoc committee report on objective standards for townhomes and provide direction to staff on recommended revisions of the objective standards. I'm going to let Yingxi and David, they're going to be presenting this, but I believe that Stephen also has an intro for us with a little bit of background. Claire will be doing just a little bit of the background for us, so I don't have to read the whole thing. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to speak verbally. I don't have a presentation, but we are hoping to come to a conclusion today on the ad hoc committee's recommendations and get a formal recommendation from the board on how we may want to change our objective design standards to better align for townhome projects. I think when the objective design standards were originally developed, there was kind of an understanding as we got to the end of the process that it was, while it did accommodate townhomes, that, we could make some changes to be more clearly defining what we want to see on townhomes, because we did have objective standards that kind of applied, that were maybe a little awkward to apply to townhomes in the same way that they were being applied to larger housing developments like a condominium or rental project. So with that, we had a series of presentations from the ad hoc committee and a series of discussions, and this will be our 7th discussion on the item. Hence, we are hoping to come to a conclusion today, get a recommendation. At our last hearing, we had a really productive conversation about and really kind of came to conclusions as between board members on what the board wanted to recommend. The chair at the time asked that we return with a summary of the conclusions of that, of that meeting, and may be able to make a formal recommendation. Everything had been noticed as a study session at the time, and we really just wanted to pull everything together with the meeting minutes and have a clear summary. So with that, what we've prepared today is we have attachment A, which is a summary that the ad hoc committee which is composed of Vice Chair Chen and Board Member Hirsch, put together of just a summary of the meeting minutes and the conclusions. They then took that and made some additional edits just kind of for clarity. And so attachment B reflects the some recommendations they have to add to those notes and the final recommendations. They're annotated with underline and yellow highlight, and that's because there were some things that the ad hoc committee agreed upon, which are the items underlined in or annotated in an underline. There were some additional items in yellow that the ad hoc didn't necessarily agree upon, but they wanted to kind of present for the board's consideration. So I think we're kind of looking at the attachment B mainly, hoping to have some additional discussion about any additions that they've added. And again, try and reach a final conclusion on the recommendation for today. So with that, I will turn it back to the chair.
All right, thank you, Claire. So for process on this one, I believe that board members Chen and Hirsch have a presentation. Is that correct? Or no, it's
I
just we're
don't,
going
not
over
a formal
this.
presentation, but
Okay.
if they'd like to speak.
Perfect.
Anything?
Okay. So at this point, we're basically going over the additions that are underlined, correct? And then the items of contention, which are highlighted. And this is all an attachment.
Yes and no.
Okay,
Can I speak
please
to
go,
that?
take it away.
Look, in the first place, there's been a lot of work done on this, and I credit my partner in this, who's put together almost all of this, and especially all of the visuals that were part of the package. During the process of discussing this with the city, with the planning department, we agreed that we should keep all the visuals in the packet because they're very, very useful in realizing each one of the details that we could talk about. I personally have been continuing with the sort of the study of the way in which this presentation has been made to date and have significant amount of comments to make. Some of it's simply language comments, some of it is further definition of parts of this and detailed discussion. Some of it is additional items, for example, which might affect facade that haven't been mentioned before. And some of it is the leading up to what's going to happen here is we're going to turn something over to planning, and planning is going to make a document out of it. If I have it correct, I'm not sure how that happens, but whether it becomes part of or an adjunct piece to objective standards, or how it's going to be done, it's certainly going to be done by staff, as they said they would previously. So I think it's very important for us to be all inclusive and to get the language straight and to get items into this that are really essential in our review. So with that, what I have done, and we haven't had the opportunity because it's been ongoing through the process here. We haven't had an opportunity to really discuss it in detail between myself and my partner in this. So if you would keep an open mind to what we'll be discussing, maybe we can go through it item by item and say, yes, that's a good one, or no, that doesn't make sense as a board.
Could somebody refresh my memory, my understanding, please, of this objective standards recommendation, pages 19 through 21? There's a number of parts of the text that are underlined and others that are highlighted. What is the significance of those?
Okay, so that I can do that. That's kind of my first take at review. And actually, I have a whole other piece here that replaces that.
So
I want to comment that Claire and I had a discussion.
What is
That whatever else I had to say about this today should be based on having sort of underlined the items as they were described and describe what I have done to make those changes. What are the changes? And what we could do is sort of use the outline that's been created here, the townhouse objective standards outline, and we could follow through on that and then reference it to something that is a separate document here.
So just want to clarify, so the text with the underline are the ones that David and I are generally agree with each other, but the highlighted ones we have different opinions on that, so.
But in general, either the underlined or highlighted text is new to this document
Yes,
from last
yes,
time.
you're correct.
Okay, so and Fine, so it's your recommendations, the way of communicating,
Yeah,
where you
yeah,
recommend
basically, yeah.
collectively or individually.
Both the underlined and the highlighted are the new thoughts, additional thoughts compared to what we summarized in attachment A.
So, but I'm saying here that I'd like to add items, item by item, as I've made some changes, they don't reflect everything in the underlined items.
Okay, so
They're more than that.
I have a question. So you have an additional document that none of us else have, correct?
That's right.
Okay,
We agreed that that shouldn't be distributed.
okay. So my question, again, I'm not trying to berate you or put you on the spot here, David, but we've had quite a long time to have this. And I think the last time we had a meeting was in 2024 of March, almost a year ago. And we were hoping to review the townhouse home items last ARB meeting. So my question number one is sort of why is that not incorporated? Like, I think that for efficiency's sake, that the
Yeah.
whole point of this is that we review the items that need to be adjusted and we move forward. But if there's an additional document, that makes me feel like we don't have all the thoughts in front of us.
Yes, the process really, I've been told by Claire that it's, you can't, I shouldn't be, we shouldn't be discussing it as an item prior to the meeting, so I couldn't really, it shouldn't be distributed to you.
Because it was not included with the distribution packet per legal requirements.
Right.
So,
So the only way we really can do this at this point is to discuss it.
yeah, understood. So I think how we're gonna go about this is we're gonna go item by item around attachment B. If something comes up, we can have a conversation about it. But this is also, I think that it's kind of wildly not appropriate to change everything at this point when we've had 7 meetings on this and we've had multiple years since November 17th, 2022, right? And then the most recent one was March 7th, 2024. So knowing that that's sort of the history here, I would like to bring this to a conclusion today. So just making sure that we're not opening a whole new can of worms and sort of staying focused on what definitely needs to be adjusted. And again, understanding also, David, that I appreciate your sincere time and efforts on this, because once this does get pushed forward for approval, this will probably remain as such for several years, if not decades, based on how often we change rules. So these are important and I want to take them seriously. But again, I want to stay focused on a process that we as the ARB, all 5 of us can follow along with and understand.
If you don't mind, I can read through these things rather quickly.
Okay.
And you can comment on them immediately, and then we'll keep track of the changes that you would suggest and move on with it that way.
Let me ask a question before you dive in. Are those items that maybe like as we go down attachment B, can they be brought up like different items at different times? Or is it better, like, are they an overarching theme of townhouses that should be read first?
Well, yes, there's certainly some of the aspects of them, as you'll really hear, are overarching.
Okay, let's start with the overarching themes of townhouses.
All right, so then let's start. Definition of townhouses would be the first one. Townhouse definition, exclusively residential units arranged in clusters, I think is part of the original text, but the change would be to vertically single stacking building type units with a minimum of 2 stories, but more commonly, this is an addition, but more commonly 3 stories with private vehicular parking on the first ground floor, living rooms and bedrooms above, at least 2 exterior facing walls, which is part of what we've discussed originally. End units have 3 exterior facing walls, that's part of it as well. And cul-de-sac units, which is in addition to this, because it wasn't described before, which have 3 exterior facing walls at the closed end. A more atypical town, so that was a description of cul-de-sac units, which wasn't included, okay? So if we include that, then more atypical townhomes arranged above a grade platform, including all of the parking below, and townhome clusters above, including the unbuilt areas as pedestrian circulation space, and common use space, including landscaping. So it really defines not only the typical singular line of townhomes, but expands it to cul-de-sac units, a description of the cul-de-sac units. And that would be the better definition, in my opinion, of a townhome.
Hang on. So I guess my question is, and sort of a philosophical question, is it better to hyper define the townhomes, or is it better to loosely define the townhomes, right? What's the goal of this sort of definition? Because like, let's say something, is 2 units side by side considered townhomes or not, right? Does it have to be 4 units? Is it 17 units, right? Versus, my concern is that if for some reason a townhome is uniquely designed in a way that doesn't match this, that all of a sudden it gets excluded. So I guess the question is it better to have a loose definition, or is it better to have a tight definition? And I'm going to look at board members Chen and Hirsch here. Like, what do you think the goal is here, to have a extensively defined?
I think it's important. I think it doesn't say too much more about it than there are several different possibilities for townhomes, and these are the basic formats for townhomes.
I guess my concern is if we hyper define it and suddenly one little element doesn't comply, then suddenly it's not a townhome anymore.
Well, we're going to hyper define it later on in the details anyhow. So
Mhm.
for example, we say that a linear type of townhome is 7 units only, and it's 150 feet in dimension. That's defining it very carefully.
Mhm.
And that doesn't really solve the issue of the one in which they're attached to 2 linear ones attached at the end. A
Mhm.
cul-de-sac type unit is going to be different because there'll be more units in that one.
Mhm. And then if there was, and again, I don't know how this would work, but if it was like a T-shaped versus an L-shaped, something like that, would that change the definition here, right? Like,
I don't know. I think I haven't seen a T-shaped one,
I mean, I haven't either, because then one of those units is a little bit,
but I will
Pinched,
say, I
but-
will say something about that if you,
Mhm.
I don't want
Please.
to really spend too much time because this is just a general definition. And I don't think it's a good idea to kind of expand that, but I'm listening.
If
Go
I
ahead.
may interject on that, I think a general definition, kind of like what you were asking, Chair Rosenberg, I think like in this, what is a definition should be pretty general with all of these, items below that are narrowing that broader definition. And one thing that jumped out to me from David's, like the description, is private vehicular parking below. Generally, I feel like that is a restriction too much, because there are plenty of areas where private parking is not required, or a variety of reasons, or there's shared parking instead of private parking. Especially in metropolitan cities, there is no parking directly under. I don't think in Palo Alto that should not be a requirement. That's my opinion, that private vehicular parking below the unit should not be a must-have to be a townhome.
well, and on that note, with some of the way the new housing rules are written, if you're within a quarter mile or half mile of major public transit, parking's not required. But I don't know if that applies to townhomes. So,
Generally speaking, townhomes have parking below.
I mean, generally speaking, but if the state law says that you don't have to have parking, then we've sort of made our own commentary moot. And valid would probably be a better way to say it. So that's sort of part of my definition. And then while I appreciate the description of being like with living rooms and things like that above, I worry about how much that, so I
See, if we spend the time talking too much about this, we'll never get through, right?
understood. It's just that this is sort of step one,
I
right? Is
think
defining
that-
what a townhome is. And in my mind, you should have a big, broad, general description and then a list of all these
You know-
possible scenarios of how it plays out, but they shouldn't be like requirements for it to be defined as a townhome, if that makes sense.
I don't know. I think that parking below in the townhomes is pretty much a standard. And I'd like the planning to talk to that.
It's a good point. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, to the chair's point, there is this allowance to not have parking, but my recollection is that I think it goes back to really building code, that the townhome or what they call townhome under building code has parking below. I do remember there was a project we worked on a long time ago that had a lot of nuances where they did have like a shared below grade parking garage, and then below each unit, they had the private parking for that unit. But they had like a shared common below grade, but that's the only thing I've seen that was a little bit slightly different from the traditional townhome design.
And I would add, just in terms of the longevity of these objective standards, I would advise against requiring there be parking underneath. First, for the reason that the chair mentioned in terms of whether parking would be required or not. Also, the parking rules could change in other ways. For example, in the town of Los Gatos, they require parking, but they don't require it to be covered. And so if over time that kind of requirement changed, it could be that covered parking was not required, and therefore there wouldn't be parking underneath the unit, but it would be in a driveway in front of it, for example. I'm not saying that that's something that's proposed here. I'm just giving that as an example of why narrowly defining this and including the parking in the definition could result in issues later on.
Okay, so then it could be eliminated as an item on in this definition. What I was trying to do was to do a format for what I have seen, or we have seen actually, as all of the different possibilities, which wasn't in the original using cheese sort of definition here. And I wanted to include cul-de-sacs, and I wanted to include platform type housing where the parking was entirely below on a separate platform, under a platform, which is the way it is in, what's the name of it? The Jewish Center there? What's that called?
The, under the JCC, what's it called? It's not
Yeah,
Monsanto.
right.
Come on.
Next door.
It starts with an M and now I'm blanking. I had this in my head. Okay.
Okay.
So let me propose something. We'll see if you guys are on board with this. That I think we retain the definition as a little bit more high level, and that you can have if you wanted to put an addendum under here saying these are some typical like things that we see, and you can list those items. But I'm concerned about them being definitions of what makes a townhome. You say these are typical items we see in a townhome, and use it more as a description rather than a full definition. And again, with the parking, there's definitely the possibility that townhomes could have like almost like driveways, right? But it's uncovered, and that's still a townhome, and everybody knows it's a townhome and with used like a townhome. So I would be concerned about the parking specifically, but I do appreciate the effort to say it could be fully combined, parking underneath in a big parking structure, but that each individual unit is its own item, I think makes sense. So
I don't know if you're getting the proper definition. I don't know if by saying that you're really getting a proper definition of what a townhome is.
the goal is not to restrict, right? The goal is to include. And so my concern is that if we overemphasize exactly all these hyper minutia details of what a townhome is and isn't, we're going to exclude a bunch of things that we all would look at and say, oh, that's a townhome. But then this one little thing doesn't work. So all of a sudden it's not defined as a townhome anymore. So I think my goal is that we should have this as a broad brush definition, and then absolutely include a list of these smaller items saying typically with townhomes, we see the following, but not as a requirement list, right? Just as a way to help identify a townhome if there's something in question.
That's the intent of this
Okay.
first
Okay.
paragraph.
So we're on the same page with what the goal is. Okay.
Chair, if I could ask a
Please.
question. If we had a development that had buildings of this form, where you've got
Mhm.
the vertical units, multiple stories,
Mhm.
side by side, that was proposed as rental units.
Mhm.
And instead of individual garages, there were rows of carports that were designed that were, near to those buildings.
Separate but near.
Right, separate but not immediately attached. Would we want these objective standards to apply to those buildings?
I would say yes, but I'm going to look at David here.
You know what, they're here
Mhm.
in Palo Alto, they're about 30 years old, or maybe even more. I mean, as a preference, I think that present day townhomes as built by some pretty good builders who do them with a lot of nice details, and the parking is below, are a step up. And frankly, if it's not in the code, you tell me, I think it ought to be.
Chair, if I could, we did look up the definition of townhome per the building code, and it really does speak more to form. It doesn't speak to parking. Maybe you can.
Yeah.
And if I may just read
Please.
that in the record here. So that would be a single family dwelling unit constructed in a group of 3 or more attached units in which each unit extends from the foundation to roof with a yard or public way on not less than 2 sides.
Sounds
Okay.
like
Full
a
stop.
pretty clean definition right there.
Yeah,
Done.
okay, fine. That allows the flexibility so let's use that.
I would agree. with-
Um,
Go ahead.
I have one additional thing. I think a townhome has an individual access to the exterior. It doesn't have a hallway or a common
Yes,
access, and the code doesn't say that, and I think that is important. Townhomes have front doors.
good catch. Yes.
And one more thing is, since the definition of townhome that Stephen just read is from the foundation to the roof, then which means the type, like the podium prototype doesn't work in this way. It doesn't count as townhome, is it correct?
It doesn't then. Is that correct? It doesn't include a podium type
Oh, that's a good
construction.
I'm looking at the lawyer now. That's
I know that
no,
it can include a podium type construction because
it's sitting on
the
foundation.
project that Sobrato proposed originally on what's now the 420 Acacia site did have a podium, like a
But I-
partial podium
I
style
think you can
design.
interpret the podium as the foundation.
Right,
So
it doesn't-
Sitting atop that foundation is an individual unit.
Yeah.
And what we
Yeah.
understand townhomes to be vertically stacked residential units where it's the same home in several stories, as compared to an apartment building where it's spread horizontally.
I do like this, the underlined portion, a more atypical townhome arrangement is an above grade platform. So I would say building code definition, add in the individual access from the exterior, right? And then also I would note that underlined portion as being like, yes, this is still a viable, just as an example of what's also still counts and it's okay.
I just want to add another thought to that, which is from foundation to roof. And typically townhomes the party walls are vertical, but we have seen some projects where there's a little bit of Jenga stair and such, which I wouldn't say they're not a townhome.
Yeah.
But that's, projects can propose that. And as long as fire separation and all of that is maintained, that's for the city building to confirm that that still applies. But I don't think that needs to get added to the definition of, just like podium is a very, little variation to this, that kind of stair configuration is also a variation to that basic definition.
I think a building official would make a similar determination on a case-by-case basis, and we don't need to step into that.
Yeah.
Um,
Slight
Okay,
variations in that. I think that everyone good here? We can move forward from definition?
yes.
Perfect. All right.
Well, what is our definition going to be?
Yeah, I'm just trying to,
So somebody take some notes
Right there.
here,
No, they're
please.
doing it on the screen right here.
Yep.
Townhomes are a single family dwelling unit constructed in a group of 3 or more attached units in which each
Oh.
unit extends from foundation to roof and with a yard or public way not on less than 2 sides, including access from exterior. So I'm assuming you're going to retype that
I was
something
just,
a bit more colorfully.
Why not just reference the building code
Mhm.
with individual access to the exterior? Why
Yeah,
bother to
cite
rewrite
the
it?
building code. No, but I think it's nice to have it written there so that someone doesn't have to go back and find it, right? And like literally after you put 2 sides in,
Fair enough, but
you
you
know.
don't want to risk misduplicating it or saying something slightly different.
That's fair. So after two sides, put in parentheses per current building code definition. Right. So after two sides, no
Okay,
less
so-
than two sides.
So
Third
the
line.
next,
There you go, right there.
if we could move on, then I think that's fine.
Sure. We just want to make sure that we've got this
Ying Chi, Are
updated
you on board with this?
per current building code.
This is good with you?
Yep, and put that in parentheses.
So on the next one is one on what the original submission was, one treatment of end corner units. But what we have under,
Individual access. Sorry, go ahead.
what we really have under here is is a number of, really, we're looking to define every unit in some way, right? What the facades would be like in every unit. So I thought that there would be a good idea to say required elevation features, which would be a list of items like this that applies to all elevations, including the end unit elevation, which could be somewhat different because it has two sides. Okay, just as a title, you know, that would need to be added to it. So,
Sorry, say that again, David.
okay.
So say the
I'm
words you
saying
want
that
to have written.
Treatment of end corner units would be eliminated and say, the title of the chapter would be required elevation features.
So above number one, you'd want it to say required elevation features.
Yeah, instead of
Instead of what?
the
What do you mean
treatment,
above number
treatment of
one?
end corner units.
Where does it say treatment of end corner units?
That's part of the townhome objective standards. That was the original submission here.
So the elevation features you're referring to is
On
basically
page
included
17.
on
Okay?
item 2, right?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so there's a little bit of discrepancy between the original under attachment A and the proposed under attachment B. So there's a title in attachment A that says number one, treatment of end corner units. In
Right.
attachment B, that's just sort of missing. You'd like to change that to
I'd like to
required
change the
elevation
one to
features.
be called
It's
required
basically-
elevation features.
It's
Okay.
incorporated into item B in attachment, item 2 under attachment B, right? So listed all those features like A, B, C, D, F, G, H.
Right. Right.
So it's not
exactly.
limited to end corners, it's
Right.
to all
exactly.
units. And
Okay.
what
Got it.
we
Okay,
have different opinion is last time we agreed for 2 of this, the list of features, and David suggested 3, so maybe we can take a look.
Yeah,
whether-
no, yes, I'm suggesting, first place, I thought that the wording would be all units within a cluster must consistently repeat common features per the following list, including materials, colors, patterns, so that there is a consistent character to the entire development. End units must be emphasized in importance, which is part of what we're pushing here, by more inclusive set of exterior design features per the following list. All other cluster units must include these selected features so that there is consistency and repetitive relationship of townhome clusters.
Where are these lists?
Here, A through E on the
Well,
original,
that's item 2.
it's item 1,
adding in 2 commas here.
Oh, I see.
page 17.
Okay, so yeah, there's a little bit of
But
discrepancy
you're reading
between
from page 19.
attachment A and attachment B, because there's some like the,
Don't bother with attachment B. This is a replacement of really the attachment B.
but isn't the whole point that attachment B is showing the items we'd like to update?
Yes, there's a bunch of them there, but I've rewritten them at this
But we
moment.
don't have your document.
Yes.
We don't know all of
I-
your stuff,
I
so
know.
we're,
If I had been able to send it to you, I would have, but I was.
Okay.
David, I'm gonna sound a little harsh here for a second. You've had many, many, many weeks to
saying
send
you
it,
can't share.
so.
You're saying you can't share.
I know, but this should have been done, right? So why are we looking at a document that's got edits on it that are
Okay, so
out the
let's
window
let's
already?
Understand. So Board Member Hirsch is suggesting we change the text under item 1 on page 17. Pick up the text from item 1 on page 19, but the list on page 17 remains? There's
Uh,
items A
you know,
through E.
I've noted on here the ones that would be changed. So on a minimum of 5 foot, the A, at a minimum of 5 foot, I think you need to have a 5 by 5 at the front door, right? So that's covered partial, covered entry, built unit entry. I think it's handicap requirements would be 5 by 5.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Didn't we already
So-
discuss this, though? We had a
No,
group
yes,
discussion.
but
and
no, we
decided on
didn't
this.
discuss that
Yes.
kind of detail. So I'm just doing it right now. Just cleans that one up, okay?
Okay.
So it is included on packet page 19,
Mhm.
2A.
Yep.
It's underlined by 5 foot wide.
So this list on packet
Okay,
page
that's great.
19, items A through I are the ones we're now considering as the building elevation, building design treatments that we want to give somebody. These are the guidelines.
Yeah.
And we're now, and at a high level, we're
Yes.
going to give them an opportunity to select a certain number of these as their objective.
Yes,
choice.
yes, yes.
I'm just trying to understand
Yes,
how it all fits
that's,
together.
that's what it is. You got it, right.
Okay, so.
A 5 by 5 covered partially covered unit entry. That could be one.
Okay, and I see it. By underlining it, you're indicating that you both agree on this? So the recommendation of the ad hoc
Yeah,
committee is that it's both
I'm
5
sure
feet
we
wide
agree on
and 5 feet deep.
That
Beautiful.
one we agree on. A one-sided wraparound corner roof patio, a minimum of 4 foot deep, and one-sided or wraparound corner roof patio, a minimum of 4 feet deep and a minimum of 6 feet wide. Now, I want to sort of add to that, because if it's a wraparound, it has to be bigger.
Well, my question is, yes, but that only applies to end units, correct? You're not going to
Yes.
require a 5 foot 5. So
Well,
there's a
yeah.
little bit of clarity needed there. Minimum 5 foot 5 by 5 foot deep, covered or partially. And then it's in an instance of a wraparound corner
If
roof
it's a
patio.
wraparound, it has to be bigger. And
Right.
Just Peter would remember a project which we were concerned with about wraparounds making a considerable turn around a corner of a housing project that we
Mhm.
reviewed previously. So I increased that to be an 8 foot by 8 foot dimension. So
What is
Okay,
the,
hang
what
on,
is
hang
the
on,
ad
hang
hoc
on.
committee's recommendation?
Wait, before we get into the numbers, I just want to make sure we're being very super clear about this. Minimum 5 foot by 5 foot deep is at the normal units. In the instance of a wraparound corner roofed patio, then this applies. We don't want to say that A and B both apply. So we want to be very careful by the language here. So in the instance of a wraparound corner unit, and then I maybe in parentheses add an end
But these-
unit, right?
I thought these are all,
Yes.
they can choose from this list of things. So
right,
I mean, I can imagine a central unit that projects
That's fair.
forward as a wraparound. Just
No, that's fair. Okay, I take it back. That's fair.
so.
what's that?
That's fair.
on
They get to
item-
choose
They get-
2 of those. So yeah,
on
okay, I
Item
take
B,
it back.
you're suggesting 4 foot deep by 6 foot wide, but I'm hearing you, David, said the
I said,
dimensions.
yeah, if I added to that something, because I've been thinking about it, it should be a wraparound. It has to be, if it's going to be of a proper dimension, it has to be 8 feet.
8 feet. And Ying-Chi, do you disagree? Is that why this is underlined or something?
Well, no, I saw last week we agreed it is 6 foot wide, but 8
This is
feet is
the-
something new
This
today,
is
yeah.
Board Member Hirsch's wonderful
Yeah,
creativity
so-
at play here.
Yeah.
So the question is whether it's 6 or 8 feet wide.
Right.
So let's just flag these as things to discuss and keep moving through the list first, right?
If I may, in an effort for clarity here, so there's 2 attachments in the packet. One listed starting on packet page 17 and then the other starting on page 19. So what I'm hearing from the discussion here is it's kind of a combination of those 2. So what we have on the screen here is the attachment B that starts on packet page 19 and going through that list there. So for discussion, I mean, happy to accommodate, the will of the board here, but if we can perhaps go through this list, what's listed on the screen, and then add any of these additions. So rather than referencing, say, sections from that packet, attachment A and page 17 is a little confusing on bouncing between the 2. So
Agreed. I would also say if we all are kosher with things, like I like this idea of going item by item because we are really editing the document as we go. So once we're all sort of in agreement, like with item number A, if we all agree 5 foot wide, 5 foot wide, any objections, take out the underline. We're good to go with it,
Well, no, I'm not,
right? The goal is to formalize this document. So if we're good with that edit, let's take off the
I
underline
guess,
and
I
and
guess
make it
I'd
part of
like
it.
to understand all these choices and then be able to sort of parse in my head if I'm designing this building.
Mm.
Is there a way I can make the building work? Because I think a 5 foot deep entry is going to be very challenging in a lot of these townhomes. And so I'm not going to be able to take advantage of that as an option. And so I want to just sort of understand what, if this is going to work, it has to be something a designer can use.
Again, it's a choice.
It's a
Then
choice,
it's
but
true
there has to be
because-
3 choices or
Yeah.
2 choices that work.
Okay, that's fair enough. So let's go down the whole list and then we'll circle back to
So
whether
I'd
it's
like-
2
I'd
or
like to
3.
sort of
And
wrap- I mean,
okay, so
all
keep
these
the underline
comments
for
are
now.
Good about what's
Okay.
ideal.
And
That's
just want to
fair.
also clarify, the accessibility requirement 5 by 5 is true, but not every townhome has to be accessible. There's a
Right.
percentage that needs to be.
Right, but then they would
Um,
just choose not to do that item.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
I mean,
Not every townhome has to be accessible.
yes, but you have visitors who are handicapped.
Right, but there's so many
Isn't there
steps,
a
it doesn't.
standard?
No, so only a certain percentage, board member Adcock is right, only a certain percentage has
Good.
to be.
Right.
Okay.
And if there's no ramp to get up to the porch, then having
Then we
wheelchair
could say
access
a
is sort
4
of
by
moot anyway.
5 or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay.
the third one is a balcony, 6 feet wide, 4 feet deep.
Everyone's good with that?
Balcony.
D, a variation in roof heights between townhome units.
And we need to say how much variation, how many feet of elevation difference measured by the eave or the ridge or something.
Mhm.
What would you guys recommend as the sub ad hoc? How do you define variation?
I have been told by my GC on more than one occasion, anything less than an 18-inch difference in roof height is very difficult to build, so.
Well, that's very sound advice. But to our committee here, what do you recommend as a description of variation?
I
in
think
height?
we had 4 by 6.
4 by 6. Oh, no, for the
When
roof
we were
heights, the
talking about
definition between the
D,
roof
right?
heights. Yeah,
Roof
so,
heights.
yeah.
We're on roof heights?
Yep,
A variation in roof height between townhouse units was what was written.
2 feet?
Yeah, that's what I saw.
I say 18 inches, but I could be persuaded for 2 feet.
18 inches like bare minimum, but really for waterproofing reasons, but for
Yeah.
actual visibility, it's 2 feet, right?
It's okay by
Can-
me to,
yeah.
whatever you
I would-
choose.
I would say 2 feet, like by the time, if you're thinking about architecturally, not just worrying about waterproofing, by the time you have the flashing and the other roof, 18 inches really doesn't give you another material on the side that is of any significance.
Mhm.
I would say 2 feet to have at least a foot of like a siding material by the time you get the flashing and the
Visible siding
gutters
material.
resolved.
Does it make sense to specify that variation has to occur at the eave rather than at the ridge? I could conceive a building with an equal eave, but a varied
Oh.
ridge by changing the slope. That doesn't
True.
really accomplish our objective, I believe.
That's
Yeah.
fair. Yeah,
You
different
know,
eve heights.
who designs it is going to decide exactly what materials, won't they? So if we say a variation in roof height, somebody has to design it.
Roof height at the eave of a minimum of 2 feet. Is that
Add in the
covered?
word eve, the
Yeah.
roof eve heights. Does that cover it?
I would not, I would opt for just saying that what should happen, there should be a variation.
Right, because for roof variation, it could be like, not every single unit have the same, say, gable roof. It could be one gable, one flat, or whatever variations they could be.
So there's like a potential scenario where one is sort of a gable and one's flat, and they are eve technically might line up here, but there's clearly a difference in roof height. Nice
Sorry.
with the red, Claire. I like it.
So decision, what do we have?
Let's just,
Circle back.
this is the closest we're gonna get, I think. for now.
A specific variation? Or not?
I like at least 2 feet, and I like stating eave because that really shows that you have to sort of break up the massing, which I think is the goal, but I'm not gonna die on this hill. So, and again, knowing that all of these are choices, so they don't have to do it, right?
So 5 foot wide by 2 feet if we go to the next one.
Moving on to E, yeah.
Yingchi, why are you not, what do you think this should be?
Well, the why we highlighted it because for the objective standard, not the townhome ones, the larger building, it requires like 4 feet, 4 foot wide by 2 feet. So if it's 5 feet by 2 feet for townhomes, which is smaller scale building, I thought it's just too restrictive to the townhomes.
Sorry, I didn't follow that. So
So,
Objective standards for-
we have the objective standards that applies to the larger apartment complex building. And for that one, it requires a setback like 4 foot by 2 foot.
so you're suggesting it should be 4 feet by 2 feet to be
Well,
consistent?
could be, or maybe even smaller, like maybe not 2 feet, 1 feet. 1 foot might be enough for a smaller scale, like townhomes.
And when you say facade, do you mean the facade of each townhome or the facade of the whole cluster of townhomes?
Oh, I thought, yeah, I thought it's unit.
So if I'm designing a series of townhomes and each one is say 20 feet
You're
wide,
right, so.
each
you're-
20-foot piece also has to go in and out by 2 feet?
I
over
think
width
2
of 5
feet is
feet?
appropriate.
But the 5 feet just makes it impossible to design a room because
Right.
there's no room that's 5 feet.
It's just a
wide.
bay window is all you
I
can do
think
with it.
6 feet
Yeah.
minimum.
Tacking on bay windows.
But do you really intend for each individual townhome to also have variations? Isn't that
I
going to be
think
kind of
you brought
chaotic?
up a good point, but what I saw is I'm more focused on the end unit, so. But you're right, if it's only 20 feet wide, then it doesn't make sense to have each unit have all those much variations.
If I were staff interpreting this, I would say the facade is the facade of a building. The building is a cluster of townhomes. That's how the code would interpret it. And therefore, these minimum variations occur over the course of the entire facade. As a designer, I'm just going to push and pull each individual townhome unit a little bit, which is kind of what I think we want to see, but maybe the width isn't really what's germane here. It's just the depth.
Well, I think you have to determine minimums.
I mean, I could also see a scenario where the front facades of all of these townhomes are in alignment, right? Thinking of like brown homes and stuff like that. But then to make sure that it's not just one big flat wall, that there's a bay window, right? And that
Yeah.
this one has a box window, and this one has a bay window, and this one's got a little bit of a shed roof going on or something, right? So that would match the goal. Does it make a difference if that bay window is 5 foot wide or 4 foot wide?
Well, does this then the porch over my front door, does that meet this requirement?
Good question.
The front door,
Well, if I have a row of 20-foot wide, say 5 20-foot wide townhomes, a 100-foot facade, and each one has a 6-foot by 4-foot roof over the porch or 5 foot deep,
generally speaking,
that would then meet requirement D, right?
it's an area within a living room. It's usually the front of the building and it's an area within the living room and you're not likely to have it over your front door.
I'm just reading the language here, projecting bay or deep setback. The intent is to break up monoplanar facades, right?
Correct.
Is it more of a reverse in saying that if projecting bays are used, they must be minimum of 5 feet wide and 2 feet deep? I think that's what you're getting
Yeah.
at.
That's fine.
With all these recent townhomes we're seeing, they're just sort of adding on a foot of structure to modulate the outside, and they're not even changing the inside. They're just sort of tacking on this stuff. It's really
Right.
awful.
Which is weird.
But by saying it's 2 feet might make it harder for them to
Right,
do that because
right.
it's deeper.
Right.
I think that's a reasonable way wording for it,
Does our,
except I think 6 feet seems better to me, but
does our current objective standards
but
apply
at
to
minimum,
this?
you could say minimum 5 feet seems reasonable too.
Isn't all of this just an addition to the current standards, which has a bunch of text about modulation of building facades? Are we saying that those standards will not apply if these do?
Well, are you back to the objective standards you're saying, or not?
I'm just trying to think of what's a realistic set of objectives. If I'm designing a group of townhomes, take the hypothetical 5 20-foot wide units, and I want the designer to modulate that front facade. And they're in a position where the 5 have to be lined up in a straight row because of the access and driveways and whatnot. So we want them to do other detailed modifications to that facade. Don't we currently have in our objective standards regulations about how they treat those facades? If I remember right, it's the length of the facade and all. Tell us, Stephen, what do we have right now?
Yes, there is a section, I was actually just pulling it up here, about facade breaks. And the language there is a minimum facade break of 4 feet in width, 2 feet in depth, and 32 square feet of area for every 36 to 40 feet of facade length.
So would that, so you would interpret that to how would you apply that to a townhome project then?
I don't think you can.
So I believe on townhome projects in the past, we have applied it in different ways of when they had, we wouldn't consider just a balcony coming out, but if the balcony had like, for example, if you recall, like on 739 Sutter, they actually had the balconies that were like part of the building where they had it like come down with footings that came all the way down. And so the whole facade kind of like modulated in that way. And then they had on their side, they had breaks in the on like the roof line and stuff that like came down into like the 3rd floor where it like it actually like modulated in along those side
But
facade.
the regulation you just required said, what was the length, 36 feet to 42 feet?
Yeah, so it was 36 to 40 feet of facade length. So for
That's
every 36 to 40
townhome.
feet, there would be required a facade break.
So basically every other unit would have to have one of these features. And it might be worth saying that this applies to end units, because I think that's our big objective, is that the end units can't be a big flat wall. But if I were staff interpreting this, I would interpret the facade of an end unit as a facade. And if it's more than 36 feet, this applies, doesn't it?
Like the
Yeah,
long
we
side running
applied
down the
it to
street,
both
yeah.
the side and the front. It was anything facing a street, if I remember correctly,
Right.
including the private street, I believe.
So to the ad hoc committee, what change are we trying to make that's going to be more specific to townhomes in this particular effort to get facade modulation?
I think a townhome is a much narrower structure. And you're going to do it townhome by townhome. And the maximum townhome width is probably 21 feet.
So do we want to change that modulation requirement from 36 feet to 20 feet for townhomes? Is that sort of the objective?
Yeah.
That would force every townhome to have some level of facade variation.
Mhm.
I think the title sentence here is saying exactly that, right? All units in a cluster must select minimum of 2 to 3. So each unit, each 20-foot section of townhome has a choice of these items.
So this is intended to apply to each townhome.
Yeah,
That's what
that's
the-
actually, it
the
says all, it
topic-
says all units in a cluster. I'm wondering if it should be changed per Wisdom's comment that says each unit in a cluster must select a minimum of 2 or 3.
See, staff, this is why you guys really need to be doing this stuff. Okay, so what's the intent, committee? Is it supposed to be that these apply to every one of them or the group of them?
I think the goal is that the group gets designed properly. I don't think that each and every single one.
So, what I was saying, what
Yeah.
I put here was that from a list like this, you choose 4 items that they have to, it seemed to be reasonable to say, you pick, but you pick from this list.
But you also pick from the list for that cluster, not for
Correct.
each unit.
Right,
That would be fine.
but it's funny because I sort of worried that like you might want to have every other unit have a porch because that actually increases the modulation. You might want to have every other unit have a
Can.
variation in the height difference. So
You can.
Shall we go
You should be
throughout
able to do
the
that.
entire list and see which applies to, how many items applies to each individual units and how many applies to the cluster? And then we can decide whether we could separate the two lists.
Right. If this is a recipe for you to choose from, that's really what it should be. So you have to think about all of the elements kind of we should be going over the entire list quickly and saying, you know, the dimension is right here or wrong here. But yes, you should be able to have a balcony. Yes, you should be able to modulate it by a collection of windows, whatever, you know, these different possibilities are there and you should, you can pick 4. I mean, you want to say 4 or do you want to say 3 or do you want to say 5? You know, I think 4 is reasonable, but that was only my idea.
And David, I think that depends on whether we're talking about cluster or unit. That's kind of like, as I go
Yeah.
through this list, like A and B and C are purely about variation on a unit. D is where it starts to, the D is really about the cluster, where variation in roof heights from one unit to another, not about within a unit, there's ups and downs, right? And versus E could apply to unit or cluster. F purely applies to cluster. So it's kind of, I think there's 2 separate lists if we were going to start with the title sentence of item 2 is confusing to start with.
Yeah, I'd like to go through what you're
Mhm.
suggesting, Ying-Chi, but you have to admit that it's difficult to parse out when you don't understand how they apply. So maybe you should lead us, Ying-Chi, through so we go more focus on what you think we should be looking at.
Or shall we just continue this
Yeah,
list
yeah,
first and
let's try to
then?
grind through it,
yeah.
sure. So we're on what, item F then?
The tower element that may penetrate the height limit of the RM 30, but does not exceed 15 feet in height. I think that's what we discussed last time and generally agree with it. So do we have any additional thoughts on that? Or?
What do you mean by tower element?
Well, again, it's more like an end unit, or last time when we discussed it, it's more like facing the street. But it could be public street or private street, but when you're at the corner intersection, it's better to have a tower element there, like a statement for
So
this.
is a chimney a tower element?
Could be.
What size should it be to be considered?
elevator shaft, staircase going up to a roof terrace, something. But yeah, it's, and if
Oh,
that's specifically supposed to apply to end units, I feel like that should be added in. Right, if the middle of like, let's say you've got 5 and then the middle one has like a rogue chimney, I don't think that qualifies as what we're looking for here.
We would not consider a chimney a tower element.
This is supposed to be objective, right? So words have meanings. So what is the meaning of a tower? How do you guys interpret that if we don't spell it out here? I mean, I'm asking these hypothetical questions because this is a code we're trying to write here. And it has to be, you know, people look at it that way.
We need to include at least like a face dimension on an elevation to
Correct.
have a minimum dimension, so that chimney or even like, you know, a random thing sticking up is considered a tower element.
Right, and that the roof, you know, difference, the variation in roof heights might cover if that end unit is just 2 feet taller. Now, is that something not a tower element because it's actually a roof variation, right? Is a tower element supposed to be something that's like 6 feet tall? It's supposed to be providing access, right? Versus just a 2 foot taller roof on the end unit, which would be great. I just don't know if that qualifies as a tower element. So that's where I'm getting hung up a little bit.
Do we have any examples of townhomes with tower elements that
Yeah.
and
We-
illustrate what you guys are talking
I
about?
mean, we do have one.
I remember. seeing
Arbor
that.
Real, Arbor Real, Xingqi, has a tower element.
I would also like to just tip my hat to both board members Hirsch and Chen for the amount of photography in this end of this packet here. There's a lot of good examples here. Yeah, packet page 128, trash collection at Arbor Real.
Isn't roof variation effectively promoting tower elements?
No, not necessarily. If it's an element that goes above the roof line.
Well, on packet page 63, there is a tower element, which is a 4-story townhome. Maybe it doesn't look good to everybody, but I think that's what we're trying to.
Well, if it doesn't look good, we don't want it.
Right.
Oh, that's right, that one, but I was thinking,
Oh, okay.
Page 63.
So basically that'd be adding another story.
Yeah.
So instead of being a 3-story townhome, that corner unit becomes a 4-story townhome.
Through the chair, if I
Please.
may,
Please.
just a couple of things. One, a quick time check.
Yep.
It is 10 o'clock. We're still on the first page.
Yeah,
So calling attention to that.
appreciate it.
Also, I wanted to check in. This list of items originally, I believe, was intended to be about the end units. And so the discussion is becoming kind of broader about the as a whole, the facades as a whole. And so my concern from a staff perspective is that this is now really changing kind of
Yep.
what had been originally developed and then recommended by the ad hoc as we're going through and really kind of crafting this in this discussion.
Yes, no, that's a really, really good point is that I hate to say it, but when we change the header here from treatment of end or corner units to required elevation features, we've actually dramatically changed what we're trying to accomplish with this list. So this might need to get split up into 2 lists,
And-
right? One of these is really in regards to the corner units and the other one really is in elevation features overall.
And it does also bring up some concerns in terms of conflicts and confusion in
Right.
terms of the other
Units
objective
versus clusters.
standards.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
well, I don't know what that does to us, except for the suggestion that a corner unit be described separately.
Yes, I mean, but I think that was to Ms. Arner's point is that this list was originally intended to cover corner units. By changing it to encompass all required elevation features, we're dramatically changing this conversation.
So, Chair, a question related to that, though, then
Mhm.
does that mean for any other facades, it's back to standard objective standards for any building? And this additional list is purely for the corner units, or are we looking at splitting this into 2 lists of corner unit versus facade, particularly for townhomes?
That is exactly my question. So
And
at this point, I'm inclined to say we really do need to keep a list of corner units because that's sort of where we started and that's really what we had agreed to as a board as a whole previously. Now, if we want to add in an additional list for the other unit required elevation features, that makes sense. But I think that's partially why we're having so much confusion. We're like, is it a unit? Is it a cluster? Is it a this? Is it a that? It's because the original intention of this list was to talk about corner units. So I think we do need to split this into corner units and then additional elevation requirements.
That'd be the case, we're just going to, today would not be finalization, which they're asking for here.
Right.
Yeah, and again, these objective standards were supposed to address the specific things that are different about townhome developments.
Right.
And that really is the fact that there are these corner units.
Right.
And that those need special attention. And so the concern about going on to general facade recommendations is we need to make sure that's working with the other objective standards that we have that already apply to those general
I
facades.
just don't think that the townhomes lend themselves to the general objective standards. And if you look at any grouping of townhomes that we've been looking at, you'll never make that relationship work.
And from a staff perspective, I think we can understand that concern. Objective standards are very difficult when you're trying to apply them across different types of building form.
That's right.
But really, we would recommend bringing this discussion back, looking at what this document originally, what its original goal was, is to try and tackle a few of these subjects that are particularly unique to townhomes, where some additional guidance is on top of the other objective standards, is useful in making these better designs when we can only rely on that rather than the discretionary, more variable design discussions that we've had in the past.
So to
You know-
staff, I have a question for you. So on the original one for attachment A, there was sort of these headers: treatment of end and corner units, community circulation, building typology. And in the attachment B, those headers were lost. Why?
Yeah, that was ad hoc's recommendation, the
That
revised.
we remove those? I mean, I think that those are unfortunately providing a lot of clarity. So,
Can I suggest that
please.
we stick to what's on page 17? Item 1 is treatment of end and corner units. Let's just get that done. What I suggest is we phrase it by saying corner units or end units that face two streets must have two things. One, they must have a change in the roof line, 2 feet at the roof eave to a different elevation, or the entire unit's parapet or roof line should be different than the adjacent unit. So that's one requirement, just that the roofs are different. 2, it must have at least 2 of these items in this list of A through E. So that's what we're trying to do, is modulate these corner units by having the roof change in height and by having at least 2 out of 5 of these items. That we can work through these 5 items. What I've heard so far, item A is a minimum of 5 feet deep, and board member Hirsch wanted it to be 5 feet wide. So that's a 5 foot by 5 foot entry patio, or a 4 foot by 8 foot wraparound patio or balcony. That was the advice of that's the change our committee's coming back to us.
So before, hang on, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you here, Peter, but attachment A is where we as the ARB as a whole sort of left it. Attachment B is what David and Yingshi sort of came up with since, and sort of the commentary since. Is that correct? So I don't want to just completely dismiss this attachment B that they've worked really hard on and have come to us with conclusions for. I think the hard part is that somewhere between attachment A and attachment B, some of these goals were kind of dropped. So
We can come back and look for a group of standards that apply to mid-unit townhomes. That's the 2 exposed facades as a
Yes.
separate as light on them too.
totally agree with
But
that.
let's get the end unit definition down there. What do we
Okay.
need to see on those? Because townhomes are complicated, and so by defining for everybody who's looking at this, the end units,
Yeah,
that gets us a big chunk of what our beef or issues have been.
yeah, agreed. Okay.
Okay, I'm not trying to diminish their work. Their work has been great in focusing us
Yeah.
on what's important and some of these fine tuning things.
And again, I appreciate Claire sitting here flip-flopping between A and B and getting this on the
So-
screen, because it's incredibly helpful to be able to see
So
what we're
could we,
looking at.
could we take on page 17, that treatment of end and corner units? Let's get this section
Mhm.
1 resolved.
Yeah, could you take a look at what's on the screen right now, right in front of you, or the large
Yeah,
screen?
so
And confirm whether this is what the ARB as a whole is supportive of, or whether there are further changes.
I think with some changes on this, we're supportive of it. I'm suggesting that we clarify that the roof change is 2 feet at the eave, or it's 2 feet between 2 units. In other words, saying that the roof change is 2 feet high.
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
Okay, so
Apologize.
line 1, it says must have a change in roof line after roof line put of 2 feet at the eave. Probably could say 2
Mhm.
foot,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And then unless the entire unit's parapet or roof line is different by 2 feet of elevation. Okay. So I could rephrase it more for you, but that's the gist of what we're trying to do. And then the second part of this is that you have to still pick from this list of 5 choices. There should be 5, not
Yep.
4. Okay, so we would like to change the 5 foot deep by 5 foot wide covered entry. I think that's what our committee is
Yeah.
suggesting, right?
And that they both agreed on that.
And
But
4
that is
foot-
assuming they're all accessible units, or is the, I want to clarify from David and Yingshi, is that dimension still true, knowing that not all of them have to be accessible?
So letter A would be a minimum of 5 foot deep by 5 foot wide.
Yeah.
Everybody's got their lights on. Correct. I do believe that
Okay.
if I'm not sure that you guys care if it's ADA accessible or not. So just 5 foot by 5 foot regardless, because there's no mention of ADA when you guys came to that conclusion, correct?
Right, and here, then what we are talking about, what we require here is only to the end units. But actually, based on our discussion, we start touch on all the units along the line. So will it be a separate requirement for that or?
Yeah, I think to Board Member Balte's commentary earlier is that we really do
Right.
need to focus on the
Yeah.
corner end units because those
And-
are atypical to
Right.
a unit. Like
The-
they're sort of a unique feature. And then we'll have a secondary list of like, okay, the infill units, what are we going to discuss there?
Right,
So
yeah,
keeping the discussion focused for the moment
then which means
on the
the
end.
dimensions could be different, like for
Exactly.
end unit, it could be 5 and
Yeah.
5, and then,
Yes.
yeah.
So using, with what's on the screen now, item B, the committee had recommended 6 feet wide, 8 feet wide, not 6 feet wide. Isn't that right?
In the
Board Member Lynch?
packet, it said what we were provided was 6 feet wide.
And then David had commented he wanted 8 feet.
Oh, so
Well, I
it's
was
just
saying
David.
if it's a wraparound, only if it's a wraparound.
Because yeah, to get the depth of 4 feet, you'd end up with 8 feet at 6 feet. Imagine you had 3, 4, I'm going to draw on the screen just for fun. Imagine you had a 4 foot by 4 foot square, and then that's your sort of unit here. That ends up being 8 feet, and that ends up being 8 feet. So unless we're comfortable with that being like a 2 foot extension, then that would be 6 feet. I hope everyone
It's-
understood my sketch.
No, yes, it's 8 by 8 that way, right?
Right. So 8 by 8 with a 4 foot depth because it's
Yeah.
a corner unit.
Yes. That's,
But are we comfortable with that being like 8 feet on one side and 6 feet on the other side?
well, it's only going to be 2 feet around the corner then, right?
Yeah.
Well, so is that what
Correct.
you're meaning, the 8 feet in total? Because that's very different than what I would read. If I was trying to implement the code, I would read that you'd have to do 8 feet on both sides, which is
Yes.
pretty extensive.
Well, we've seen it done.
Could we edit it to say 8 feet on the primary side and 6 feet on the secondary side?
That means it's only a 2 foot overlap on the actual building on one side.
Yeah. But it gives you
I'm
that
just
depth of
asking if
6 feet
that's-
that way versus 4 feet that way. To me, that works. I'm
could
not
work.
opposed to that.
It could work. We had a problem with it on a particular building where we wanted it extended more.
Right.
Do you remember that?
It's a
Peter?
minimum, so they,
Yeah.
you know, based on the design, the designer could do more.
Could do more. That's fine. Could be 8 and 6. Either which way. Depending upon where the door is, you know.
Well, I don't think it's necessary to say 8 feet on primary and 6 feet on secondary facade. It could be vice versa, right?
Yes,
So-
fine.
I think that naturally, just the way that that's going to geometrically lay out, if it's, right? If that's 6 feet and that's 8 feet, like David's saying, that's only 2 feet right in that zone. So you're never going to have a door there.
Never
So it's
gonna have a
always
door.
going to be the primary side there.
But you
always.
could, this is minimum.
Yeah.
Of a wraparound. Somebody could make it bigger if the door is there, you know?
But to your point, do we need to put the words primary and secondary? Probably not. It's sort of self-explanatory, but I'm not opposed to having them in there. So up to you guys.
So 4 foot by 6 foot balconies, that's consistent with most townhomes?
I think so.
Okay, that's the whole purpose of you guys looking at
In
this.
clarification here, you're saying extending, so balconies must be projecting out from the face of the facade. It cannot be an inset. Is that true?
Good point. Have it.
I wouldn't necessarily say.
Should we change that to say a minimum of 4 feet deep? But then if they're, but then
So
the flush of the front of that balcony could be in line with everything else. And again, my also question on this is this only for the end
Nobody
units?
said projecting exclusively, did it? Is it, does it?
Extending from the facade. So it
Oh.
was projecting
Well, no,
exclusively.
So let's get rid of it.
And then the secondary question is this specifically to the end units or is this like an overall question?
Well,
And this is specific to the end unit.
this could be specific
guys
to
are
an end unit.
Yeah, I think we do need to come back and be clear that we're really intending for this to be the end facade of the end units. It doesn't really say that clearly here. But the balcony could just be a minimum of 4 foot by 6 foot wide balcony, 4 foot deep, 6 foot wide, and it's up to the designer
Mhm.
how it relates to the building facade. I think all
Yep.
of us would
Could
agree
be
that. needs to-
inset or partial inset
Give-
or
Even
fully
though the
extended.
open space requirement is 6 feet deep, right? But it's still minimum, it's 4
Well, I've
feet.
long argued balconies need to
Right.
be deeper than 4 feet, but
Yeah.
I think I'm just trying to.
That's
trying to get
minimum.
closer
Yeah.
on this.
Right.
Minimum, yeah.
Beautiful.
Can we define a tower element as a minimum square footage and a full story higher? Say minimum of 250 square feet and 1 additional story of building use. So that it ends up being something they use.
I thought 4 feet could be some interior closet, or pantry or whatever, something like that.
But
And 4 foot wide by 2 feet deep
for a tower,
for a tower.
but you want it to be substantially taller, right?
Yeah, so
Like a
it looks
full-
sort of like a chimney element, but it's a significant piece. But that's a minimum. If you state minimum, somebody can build a bigger one.
It is also allowing for an exception to the height limitation of the RM30, right?
Yes,
So I guess there's a little clarification here to let people know you are allowed to build the extra story, right?
you're
Which they may
allowed to
not,
build
a
an
chimney.
element that goes
or
up higher.
a
like a
roof
chimney.
terrace access stairwell.
No, that-
Why not?
well, that's a much bigger item.
But that's the point, isn't it? That people are allowed to do a full extra floor. Why wouldn't they be allowed to do a stairwell access chimney as the tower element? I guess that's exactly the question is what do we want to define a tower element as? Is it a whole story? Is it an access? Is it a chimney?
If it's a tower element, I think it's
But define tower element. Like, what is a tower element?
a smaller structure that can extend above.
Okay, so that
And
one that
not
you
a
had on,
story,
what was
because
it, page? I think you just had it
There is
earlier.
one. There-
63 on packet page
No,
63.
that definitely not that one, the big one.
Okay, on packet page 63, Celsius 44, Riverfront Warehouse District, Petaluma, California. That tower element is a full separate floor. So to Peter's point, that could be a whole bedroom and bathroom addition that, again, the designer would be allowed to violate the RM30 height limit in that corner to allow for this whole extra floor. Is that what we're trying to allow or is that what we're trying to prevent?
I don't think we're trying to allow that.
Okay.
That's too much of a problem with zoning.
So then, in my mind, tower element would be something that's a non-habitable space.
Mhm.
That's a unique architectural feature. Now, personally, I would like to argue that I think that having a stairwell access to a roof terrace is kind of a nice feature. That you could utilize that as a well-designed tower element and then also provide You know, if that happens to be a flat roof of that corner unit, you could have a roof terrace up there. Now, that's my personal opinion. So again, I don't necessarily think that needs to be written into code anyway, but I think that to allow for the creativity there could be beneficial. But if you're saying it just wants to be a unique architectural element, that's fair enough.
In order to achieve that, would you as likely go up the staircase well that you already have,
Mhm. Yeah,
which isn't likely to be at the corner of the building, it's likely to be on the interface,
probably.
you
Yeah.
know? So in reality, you would just extend the staircase up.
Yeah. Well, and then and in that case, does that staircase extension qualify as a tower element? Or no? Well, my concern would be, I don't want people like ticky tacking on like a fake chimney just to get this tower element to work, right? That would be a little bit more problematic. So I guess that's where,
Staircase is a pretty big thing.
yeah, agreed. Yes, please.
If I may.
Yes, please.
So in the objective standard, so it's defined as, say, a corner element
Mhm.
for context of the discussion here. So that would be a change in height of at least 4 feet greater or less than the height of an adjacent primary facade.
But we're covering that with our roof change height of at least 2 feet. So then the following question is, do we need to have this tower element item at all? Right? If it's just a chimney, then do we need to have this? We can just say chimney penetrations are allowed. Yeah, exactly. They're already allowed anyway. So,
People, it might not be a chimney. A chimney is a specific use. You want to really add as much flexibility to it. A tower element can include a chimney, or it can include a closet
but how would you
And
access the
the-
closet if
the
it's up on the
minim-
roof?
from the inside. No, from the inside of that portion.
But that would require it to be a floor to get to that.
Right. Right.
Through the chair, wanting to bring the discussion back to the design of the townhomes, right? That I believe this was added originally in talking about variation and architectural design elements.
Mhm.
And so being cautious about allowing something that exceeds too much the standard zoning regulations, but really focusing on design elements.
Okay. To circle back to the very first part of this, we have a 2-foot eave roof change height. Do we need to have a maximum so that they are not allowing a second floor? Right? Are we going to have just a minimum of 2-foot change height versus a maximum of 6 foot? Or are we going to allow a whole extra level up there? Right? I get those two tied together in my mind, which is why I'm asking that question right now.
It's not realistic that they can violate the zoning code height limit.
Right.
Just because it's a townhome on the end unit. It's not going to get through the process again.
Right.
So I think just because we say it here doesn't really make a difference. Let the designer decide how big this feature piece has to be. With all respect, I just don't see us having a definition of tower element.
No,
that
I
makes
don't
any
either.
kind of statutory sense.
Yeah.
I just don't know how you could define that kind of architectural detail.
And to allow it to be a 20-foot potential height difference. Well, no, sorry, that's not 20
And
foot.
if we wanted to allow significant change on corners to go above the height limit, that's a larger policy issue that I'm not sure we can chime into right now.
The
We want to
corner-
focus what they're saying on
Yeah.
some design details that make these better.
Agreed.
Agreed.
So I think having the roof change is sufficient to get us there.
Say, how to put it in words, what you're saying.
Well, we already have at the top unit here. Roofs have to have a 2-foot change in roof height. Either an individual piece of the roof or the whole unit's roof has to be taller than the adjacent roofs. Taller or shorter.
Taller or shorter.
Or shorter, yeah.
Mhm.
I would think as an architect, that's giving me some tools I can work with to differentiate the end unit. It's forcing me to do something.
Okay.
And that's our objective.
My thought was that if they have the possibility of an element that, and it doesn't necessarily have to go above the roof, but it could be an expression above the roof.
Well, they have that possibility, but
With what?
to regulate it is different. I mean, you're trying to require it,
No, I'm just saying it's an option.
but to call it a required option. Which is
It's not
list
a
of-
required option. In other words, I think that there should be a choice of more than 4.
I agree, but this one is too hard to define as an objective standard.
Okay.
That's what it comes down to, David, is after 20 minutes of
You
discussion,
know,
we don't have
yes,
anything
we've had
close to it. We
too
don't have
damn
anything
much
close to,
discussion on it, right?
because we don't have a clean definition.
Mhm,
And that's sort of where we are with it.
mhm.
On to the next one.
Yeah, I just had a quick question of what the existing height limit of the RM30 is. Because it's
30.
saying it can penetrate the height limit, but does not exceed 50 feet. So
Yeah, 35 feet.
35 feet. So that'd be allowing for an additional 15 feet of height for a tower element that we don't have defined.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we do, I just, again, bringing it back, we do have a code requirement that requires a 4-foot differentiation on the end unit currently in our code.
So we're actually reducing the differentiation because
Well,
townhomes are
but-
defined as having only a 35-foot height limit.
No, but that's why we're doing this, because that requirement doesn't make sense for townhomes.
Right, having a
Okay.
We want to do
4-foot,
this roof variation.
right, but we don't
Okay,
need
that's
4
what-
feet.
Okay, so this would,
That was
Yeah.
intended for apartment buildings where you had a larger mass.
Right.
And it makes sense, but 4 feet is otherwise potentially a big change.
Yeah.
Sure is.
Too big.
well, I guess to that end, 15 feet would be a pretty big change. too, then.
And especially for
15
something we
feet
don't have
would be Way
defined.
over, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So that
I would design this, I'd
illustration
Put
really-
another floor on it. Take it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, I
15
guess then
feet, I'll
you
get
have
a
another
floor and a
floor.
loft.
And it may be
Let's
great
go.
architecture, but I don't know if it's going to pass muster with the planning.
Yeah.
Okay, comfortable striking D? Okay, seeing nods, seeing nods. All right, moving on to E, a setback area of different material and or color. And by the way, because I am keeping an eye on the clock, Ms. Arner, we're going to take a break in just a couple minutes, but let's get through E and then we'll take a quick pause. Or is there F? No, that's a different one. Okay, so we'll get through E, a setback area.
Treatment of end units.
Yes, and that's all of the treatment of the end units. Setback area of different material and or color of the major facade material. I don't think there's any question on that
How
one.
much area? What do you mean by?
Oh, goodness, you're right, you're
I just
right.
I put my
You're not
red tile
wrong.
at the front door and call it a day. And that's what Frank Lloyd Wright did on every building, right? 6-inch square red tile and that's it. I would feel that meets this requirement.
It's hard to get to this list, it's not easy at all.
Don't we have a definition for this in the regular objective standards? We worked this out, what percentage of area it had to be.
Stephen, we're going to put you on the spot. Do you have any idea from the original objective standards what the setback area of different material and or color of a major facade material is?
I can look into that right
That'd be
now.
great, thank you.
To my colleagues, I think what we want to really say is that this list of stuff is intended to apply to the end facades
Yes,
of these townhome units. And that's what we don't really say that clearly up in the front. But that's, I think, the important crux to all of this.
But the entry patio is frequently not on the end facade, right? You're talking about the end of the unit. So usually all the doors are facing one direction. You wouldn't have the end unit have the entry porch
No,
on
that's
the other
not,
side.
that's not viable. You can't do
Right.
that.
So
Well-
isn't that what, if we say this is for the short elevation of the corner unit, isn't that what we're saying?
Well, my understanding was that our design objective was to get those end facades to be more modulated, to have more design
Mhm.
treatment
Then a flat
than a flat
wall.
wall. Because most of the time we see the townhomes come in and it's the exact same floor plan and they just change the
Right.
color or something.
and on the interior units, those front porches may be non-existent or smaller, and that's totally fine. But on these end units, we want those, for just as an example, we want those porches to be a little bit more notable, a little bit more interesting.
True, but it would be on the long facade, not the
Yeah.
end facade.
So you're right, though, that some of these are really intended to, don't really apply to the long
Right.
facade.
I think generally speaking, all of the entries are on one facade in almost every one, but there's an option in an end unit that you could have it around the corner if there is space for it. And it makes it unique that way. So
There's space for it, all the, having front.
I can't hear you.
Sorry. Yeah, it changes the design of a, series of 5 or 7 units. And the driveway and everything, if the entrance to that end one is around the corner and then there's a little bit of landscaping in front. So I'm not trying to design it for anybody, but the list of choices here, I think gets shorter if we're purely talking about the end unit.
Very
Because
short,
we're also asking for them to choose 2 out of 4 of these now.
unless you change the number for that particular one, but it would, that's why I didn't think that an end unit should be exclusive that way, and that there should be a list for the whole of the townhouse, and then you choose which one you want. You know, and it could be different at an end unit if you have enough items to choose from. Just didn't seem logical to me that you would treat an end unit as a list of items, but rather have the cluster as the list.
But with our previous discussions, and we've had several, we all sort of ended up on the concept that these end units should be treated differently. They
They
should be
should be,
emphasized in a different
but
way, which is why we're
you-
creating a list that's specific to them.
So you say that in the introduction, that the end unit, that's what I tried to do, is you say it in a general introduction to it, the end unit should be special, and that here's the list.
And I think that's where I'm parsing words of end unit should be special versus the side facade of the end unit should have
Yes.
XYZ variations.
Yes, correct. You can definitely focus on just the side of it should be emphasized.
Well,
And-
and the roof height variation.
Right.
And the roof height variation, yes.
So-
But if you put that down as the list, part of the list is the roof height variation is a part of the list.
But I think we're saying that's not optional. The roof height variation must occur. on
No,
any
I don't
units.
think you can say that. In fact,
That's what we've written
later
down.
on we say you can't have more than a certain number in the number of, if you have 7 units, you can't have more. Zingji, you know that. Speak to that one.
What?
To
You
how
mean the
many,
condom part, the
only have a certain number that stay the same.
tandem parking or? Well, here's a suggestion. So when we talk about the end unit or corner unit, we also see it as the entire building, and we want the entire cluster, and we want to see some variations at the end. So why don't we still put, since we see the corner unit list is getting shorter and shorter, why don't we still put everything in a large list and then pick it from them? So say if we come back to packet page 19 and then cross out the all, starting item number 2, cross out the all units, and then we add each unit requirement, say under A or B, we say each unit shall have a minimum of 5 foot deep by 5 foot wide covered porch. And then for the other ones, we could be more specific, like for end unit, we can have something like a wraparound balcony or something like that. So,
Or wrap around patio or
Yeah.
wrap around balcony.
so yeah.
Absolutely.
Because all in all, we still want to see some variations on when we look at the entire cluster instead of like just focus on a small.
But
Okay,
I-
so-
sorry,
Sorry, go ahead. So I'm going to jump in, sorry. So if I'm understanding correctly, your sort of advice here is that we come up with a list that applies to all the units. Then substandard of that, we have a list that's sort of saying, okay, so cluster has to have X, Y, Z. Each unit has to have X, Y, and Z. Corner units have to have X, Y, Z. Is that sort of the goal?
No, I think we could simplify it to say that the cluster can have A, B, C, D, E. But in A, B, C, D, E, we could be more specific, said A, each unit could have, B, each unit could have, and C, end unit could have. And then we have, say, 10 items, and then have the designers, the applicant, to choose from 2 or 3 from the entire list. I don't know if that is.
if I may, through
makes
the
sense.
chair, I'm really struggling with this conversation because frankly, when I look at attachment A, I have a clear understanding of, what sections we are changing to address townhomes. But what we're talking about here is crossing a bunch of different sections of the code. We already have whole code sections that speak to variation, depth of patios. We have a whole section on private open space and depths of patios and widths. We're not intending to create a whole separate code sections for townhomes. The idea was that we would add in some language to provide some clarity. And when I look at attachment A, I have a clear understanding that the board came to a general consensus on as to what we were doing with that. And I feel like now we are going down a whole different path, and I'm getting very confused about how this is going to be worked into, or how it might align or conflict with other sections of the code that we have. Ultimately, these are things that have to work. We'll have some clarity of like, this is for townhomes or something, or for townhome corner units, but it has to work, in a way that doesn't also completely change everything to only address townhomes. So then we don't have something that addresses, larger buildings, rentals, or similar.
Right. So I completely sympathize with your commentary here, is that the goal of this was to say, we have objective standards for residential units. We as the ARB brought this. This is not something that was demanded by city council. We decided that we felt townhomes needed some special definitions. The goal of this document is to focus on which special definitions are exceptions to the objective standards, right? It's not to create a whole new set of objective standards just for townhomes. It's saying, okay, objective standards apply to residential units. With townhomes, what's different? And specifically, what's a little bit more lenient? Because things that are more restrictive, I mean, the objective standards are there with the most restrictive items, correct? So that's sort of the point, is that we can't go really much more restrictive than the objective standards. If I'm understanding that correctly, if I'm not, please correct me. So for example, with this roof variation, objective standards say it's a 4-foot roof variation at the corners. With townhomes, we're like 4 foot's a lot, 2 foot's better. So allowing for that to happen. And I agree that I'm sort of feeling like we're getting a little bit in the weeds here. We're sort of losing our way here a little bit, and that I'm not quite sure what the best path forward is at the moment, right? We've got a lot of work done by Yingxi and by David. But flipping back and forth between the documents, there's something lost in translation from A to B. David has additional comments. And so at this point, I'm sort of struggling a little bit with what the best process forward is to make sure that we're really keeping our goals in mind and really creating a cohesive, succinct document that we can hand over to city council as our recommendation as the ARB, what we think should apply. So on that note, let's take a break because it's time anyway. So why don't we take 10 minutes and then we'll circle back and we'll sort of see if we can get our thoughts in order at that time. Okay. Thank you. We'll be back at 10:50. All right. 10:52, we are back in session. Okay. Had a minor meditation moment there. As chair, I'm going to speak. I just don't think we're ready at this point to continue this discussion. I think there's too much back and forth. There's too much confusion between item A and item B. So what I see as a path moving forward is two potential options. The last document we have is attachment A. We could vote on that right now, right? That's the last comments that we had. We could do that, and I would feel like board members Chen and Hirsch would be missing out on a lot of the comments that they had made and a lot of the hard work they have done. The other option is that we bring this back again, with the focus that we really need to go back to attachment A and make comments specifically on that. We need to have a formalized document. The intention of attachment B was good, right? Highlighting what's to be changed from attachment A, highlighting items of discussion, right? The hard part here is that we're talking about corner units, we're talking about full units, we're talking about this, we're talking about that. We've got one board member who's got a list of additional comments. We've got another board member with a separate list of additional comments. For the whole ARB to be able to vote on this, we need to have a clear and concise list of what it is we're voting on. The point is, we've had 7 discussions on this. We've had multiple meetings where we were expecting to see it and it didn't come forward. And again, not trying to berate anyone here, but at this point, I'm feeling like we're still really not ready to review, right? We don't have a clear list of item by item by item, which was the intention of attachment B. But I can see David's got a lot of other thoughts and a lot of other comments on this. So how do we move forward? This is not ready to be voted on in my mind. Now, if my board members disagree and they want to go ahead and vote on attachment A, I would feel comfortable with that. Attachment B clearly still has discussion, so I don't feel comfortable voting on that. And I'd like to hear from the two that have worked very hard on this, how you guys would like to proceed. Because at this point, there's too much unclarity, and we need to get something concise and efficient and summarized. So I'm going to look at David and I'm going to look at Yingxi and I'm going to ask, what are your suggestions for next steps?
Well, I agree with all of your emotion on this. That you're right. It's I've personally been kind of concerned that we shouldn't treat it lightly, and that we should, and that it needs more work. Okay. I don't know if Yingxi has the time, I have lots of time, but I'm not sure.
That's my follow-up question is, if we do, step one is, are we ready to vote on attachment A?
Well, I don't think we're ready to vote on anything. We've been seeing all of the
Comments already? Okay.
comments,
So on that note, we'll likely bring this back. And on that secondary note, I understand you guys have dedicated an immense amount of time and effort on this. So if you are tired and you would like to tap out, I fully understand. If you want a fresh pair of eyes, things like that. So
If I may, Chair,
Please.
so I think we already have a number of discussions, meetings talking about this project. And I know there will always be new thoughts coming to this subject, but I think at a certain point, we need to stop and formalize something to the staff to give them our recommendations instead of just keep continuing discussion for future meetings. And maybe we will have opportunity to revisit these standards after we see it applies to different projects, and we will test it and see there might be a number of things we need to adjust. But at this point, I think we should give them a clear recommendation instead of continuing postpone, or the applicant will just submit their applications without any townhome objective standards. At least now we have something. And if you look at the things, we agreed with lots of items, right, David? So I think if for today, I'm not sure whether we should vote on item attachment A or not, but at least if we can quickly go through the highlighted ones, at least those are what David and I are not so fully, completely agree on. So maybe that could address some of the ad hoc committee's concern. But I believe we should give something to the staff.
Okay, so let me get a straw poll,
Can I ask just,
please.
I respect what you're saying, Ying-Chi. What do you believe we should give to staff?
We could, well, for the highlighted, if we get the opportunity to go over the highlighted ones and make sure that either address David's concern, or the majority of the board make an agreement on, then I think that would be something that we could give it to staff.
That's not really answering my question. If you want us to give something to staff, it has to be a document we can vote on right now with a description of what those words are. Pretty much everything we've looked at so far is full of contradictions and back and forth and lacking clarity.
Well,
So how could we possibly
Yeah,
give that to them?
yeah, that's the thing. So if you look at attachment A is basically what we discussed and go over it during a year ago and we agreed on. But for today, if you look at it again, there are still like controversial
Well,
discussions about it. So
I started just thinking that the thing on page 19 was the replacement for attachment A. This was going to be what we would vote on. But as we go through it, this is just not ready for prime time, and you know that. This one on page 19, it's not an improvement on attachment A, it's a confusion of attachment A. Because you guys didn't come to agreement on it, which was the objective of having an ad hoc committee, so you guys would do this work for us. So I respect that you want to pass something to staff, but what is it you want us to pass? Because I think we're all eager to get this, to follow your recommendation and go. But what do you really recommend? Besides from saying we should go through this.
I mean, I think that also, to Peter's point, part of this is that, you know, the difference from attachment A to attachment B, right? We lost some of the headers and things like that. And I'm assuming that that was a reason for pulling those out. But even just the concept that like there's the treatment of end or corner units, that was replaced by facade elevations, that created a whole whirlpool of confusion that we had during this meeting. So I think it's just really going back and getting this, if we're gonna do attachment B and make those adjustments, we need to have them clear and concise in a way that's much more closely related to attachment A, right? Like almost going back to scratch and saying, okay, with attachment A, what are the edits, period? That's it. Go ahead.
If I may, through the chair, suggest kind of option A, but with clarity on next steps.
Okay.
So what we could do is make a recommendation on attachment A that was a summary that we had consensus on.
Mhm.
Ultimately, this is a recommendation that will, be considered by staff as we prepare ordinance changes that will go to the planning commission and then go to council. So, we can take these considerations and even, you could even add in direction to consider some of the changes that were in attachment B just as a broad, comment or something. And when staff has a proposed ordinance or draft ordinance that we can, more clearly define, like where are these going to go in the code? How are they going to modify the code as it exists today? Come back to the Architectural Review Board at that point, and we can make refinements at that point with clear understanding and clear code language of how this would kind of relate.
So if I'm understanding correctly, your recommendation is that we push forward with A, knowing that it's not going to get written into code tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
And that putting it in the code could include an additional discussion by the ARB in addition to PTC and council, if that was the request from the ARB.
Sorry, I'm thinking, so I apologize for the silence, but I'm trying to. arrange my thoughts. I would like a straw poll from the ARB if, person by person, if you think that attachment A is ready for prime time. Can we start with Musum?
Yes, with the few underlined portions of attachment B that they have agreed to that we bring forward for minor edits to attachment A in this conversation. Because
So-
clearly, like, as I'm trying to make connections,
Right.
attachment B is related to certain sections of attachment A. It just got blurred in this losing headings and
Mhm.
being consolidated. So if there are a few items from B that can help either clarify or add some features to attachment A, I'd be all up for that.
Okay. Yingxi, what's your thought?
Yes, same thing here. Agree. Attachment A with some refinement that the additional added things from attachment B. But for today's meeting, if we decided to continue, I think today we need to go over the highlighted portion, or the next meeting will be another discussion session instead of making conclusion.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. David?
I mean, what
You're on.
what happened and why it went beyond attachment B is that in terms of the way in which things are detailed, I felt that we made a mistake in not treating things differently so that the features that we were talking about, or the aspects we were talking about here, had a generalized direction, like, so that in particular, elevation features was one way of describing it. Well, it is elevation features, but it should be described as that. And that there are physical limitations of townhomes, which we haven't discussed at all today. And they dealt a lot with the way in which townhomes are laid out relative to each other, so that there would be limitations on the lengths of townhome, which I don't know if it appears in any other document that you have at this point, but we could make a decision that townhomes should only be, let's say, 150 feet, which Xingqi and I felt was reasonable, but these are elements that need to be discussed in detail, that only two clusters can be in a line with each other, that cul-de-sac units have those same dimensions, length dimensions as if they were the length of the larger dimensions were the same. That there are more dimensions between things that are described, and in particular, something we have run into in the past in discussion about other townhomes that we've reviewed, is that the public space be a certain size. And we have agreed upon something that a percentage that made sense. So these are a lot of other aspects which we haven't even gotten to today, because we got hung up on item number one. I would have said that it would have been helpful had we sort of roughly gone over all of them, all of these different parts of this. So the physical limitation of townhomes is a certain collection of regulations that I think are worth discussing. Required elevation features we've been talking about. Definition of townhomes, I think we've expanded upon. General requirements of townhome developments, which has to do with the paving changes and safety issues and, you know, the whole idea of guest parking hasn't been discussed at all here. And that was a big issue with us on previous projects, and we have to get to that. So, I mean, I think that we have to discuss the whole subject, and we're not there yet. We're not even close. We got hung up on item number 1.
I'm gonna continue with the straw poll. So the question is, you don't think that we're ready to vote on attachment A. You think that there's far more discussion to be had
Well,
here, correct?
there isn't a lot on attachment A, but it should, but there's a distinction between, is it the corner unit or is it the whole cluster that we should be talking about? Do we have enough items within it that are going to say that somebody could take those and choose from them and make an excellent townhouse out of it, you know?
So I want to finish with what Board Member Balte has to say, and then I have a sort of a comment to that. So Board Member Balte,
I can support attachment A as it's written here.
would you add in
Better
the,
half a loaf than nothing at all.
would you
Which
add in
one?
the underlined items?
Attachment A as it's written.
And
As
then
it's written,
per-
which one?
It's page
Attachment
17,
A.
and
Page
18.
19 or page-
No, that's attachment B. I'm talking attachment A is pages 17 and 18. In my opinion, that's more comprehensive than what I see on pages 19 and to 21. This gives it more detail, more specificity.
Would you add in the underlined items
What's-
that
what's-
both board members have
what-
agreed to?
You're saying all of attachment A, just townhouse objective standard recommendations, everything on the page?
Mhm.
I can support that, yeah. I think those are good standards that get us closer to what I think is a good standard. It's not perfect, but it's closer. So if I had to choose between that and nothing, I would take that. I'd love to see it improved further, but I don't see that in attachment B.
If I may.
So-
Please.
So going off the feedback that we heard from board member ad hoc, perhaps attachment A with the underlined items plus what we discussed today, which would be the definition of townhomes based on the building code with the individual exterior entrances, as well as the 2-foot measurement of the roof variations.
That's good.
So that level of modification of attachment A could be included, since there did seem to be consensus on those additional changes.
And knowing that this is a recommendation and will not be written into code yet, at the time that it is going to be written into code, is that something that would be brought back for our consideration? Would we be notified, something like that? So if in the meantime, we have a recommendation or a suggestion, right? Because the goal here is that we have objective standards in place. If we do nothing today, then those objective standards continue to reign as the guiding principles for design on townhomes as well as multifamily apartments. Better to get recommendations in so that moving forward, townhomes have these additional items to consider versus holding this up longer, knowing that we've been doing this since 2022. So as chair, I'm not one to push something forward just because we're on a time crunch, right? I don't think that we should push something forward that's half-baked. I don't think that we should be voting on something just because we feel like we're done with it. That being said, I think that attachment A is a notable document that we have all gone over repeatedly and has a majority of what we as a board agreed to. Now, I understand we do have an outlier here, but I think that the majority of that was agreed to. To Stephen's point, our discussion today about definition of townhome, I believe, was fruitful. And I do think that, board members Chen and Hirsch have done a lot of work and they have come to these underlined items in attachment B for good cause. I'm going to trust their judgment on those items that have been underlined and agreed to by both of them. I think that at this point, we need a motion on what we want to do as a board. And so I'm going to lead the charge here and say, I move that we approve attachment A, adding in the underlined items from attachment B, and including the definition we came to today for the definition of a townhome and the additional item of the roof change height. So that's my motion of what we should do today. And I would like to see if we have a second or if we have a vote on it.
I'd be glad to second that.
We have a motion. We have a second. So
Can you-
again, just to reiterate, go ahead.
Do you think you can just review and
gonna-
make sure I
Perfect.
don't
I'm
think
going to
I
read out
quite had
loud.
it.
We're going to approve attachment A, adding in the underlined items from attachment B. And with the definition of townhomes based on building code and individual exterior elevations as discussed today. So if there was anything that's sort of not covered in there, just make sure as we discussed it today. The 2-foot measurement for roof variations as discussed today.
At corner units, right?
At corner, it's the 2-foot measurement for roof variations at corner units as discussed today. And I think that, as Peter said, a half a loaf is better than none. So I'm not one for pushing things forward when they're not ready, but at the same time, it was pretty ready. So we've reviewed it a lot. So motion by Rosenberg, seconded by Balte. And at this point, we're going to take a vote.
Can I put in a friendly amendment?
Please.
Also striking the tower element that was previously.
Striking tower element. I'm amenable to that.
Sure.
Since we didn't have a firm
Since we had crossed
definition of
that
what.
out.
That's what earns your vote. I'll definitely do it.
Any other friendly amendments?
See if Davis, any changes?
Me, no. Not going to vote. I'm going to abstain.
So at this time, I'd like to call for a vote.
Board Member Adcock,
Yes.
Board Member Balte,
Yes.
Board Member Hirsch,
I'm abstaining.
Vice Chair Chen,
Yes.
Chair Rosenberg,
Yes.
motion carries 401.
Now, while David's vote was not a no, it was an abstain. If you would like to speak to that, please feel free. If not, we'll move along.
No, I just don't think we're ready.
Okay, fair enough. I'd like that put on the record. With that moving forward, I think that we would get this document together. If I may ask, I don't know if this is the correct process for this. I would love to see this sort of as a review of minutes, right? So in the next meeting, if we can have this document written up with these underlined items in it, and then we would review it the way we would review a set of minutes, where it's not a big discussion if there's any adjustments, but that way we as a board could see the document written in its entirety. Is that something that we could arrange for, whether it's next meeting or 2 meetings from now?
Perhaps not in the minutes, but as an informational item, we could bring it forward.
Correct.
Yes.
My comment about it being like the minutes is that it really would be an informational item to review for correctness, and that's it. It's not to be voted on. It's not to be discussed. It's really just like the way we'll review minutes is just so that we can see it all written out as one document. Any issue there?
I think having a clean document for review would be acceptable, just not opening up that discussion further. So,
Agreed. So that's where I'm sort of like, we would treat it the way we would treat a review of minutes.
I think we can share it with you. As with anything, if you identify something that we did in error, we welcome that feedback.
Perfect. Okay. So as long as we can get that on at some point in the future, I would be happy with that. Board Member Cherry,
I'd like to ask one final question.
please.
Are we talking about the details that are on here, which were for corner unit, corner element? Is that only for the corner element? Or,
So we were reverting back to attachment A, adding in the items that you guys had wanted and had agreed to with the underlined items.
okay, so yes, your answer to my question is yes. then.
Yes.
It only refers to the corner unit. There are no general comments about the other units at all.
Well, we do have those with the maximum, the rhythm and the pattern with the materiality, right? So there is those moments of that. And we do have the objective standards, which are sort of the overarching item to begin with. Okay. On that note, Board Member Chen, you had something to say?
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I just want to say, I'd like to thank you, David, because David and I working on this for a long time, and I know he put lots of efforts and time working on this and prepare lots of stuff and paragraph, writing lots of things. So I'm not sure whether we should give David an opportunity to speak publicly, at least on the record, for some of his additional concerns regarding the townhomes, because other than the highlighted ones from the ad hoc committee discussion, I know there are some other things he concerned about. So I'm very respectful for
Yeah.
those inputs. So I'm just not sure whether
You know,
you're,
that's a great point. And first of all, I'd like to thank both of you. You guys put in a tremendous amount of work. I mean, the amount of photos and detail and everything in here is outstanding. So kudos for that effort and everything.
yeah, and all in all, this is a recommendation to the staff. And I think even though some of David's thoughts might not included in attachment A, but I think it worth the staff to hear additional thoughts so that it could be on the record.
Well, and to that point, the question would be, you know, so we had some items that David brought up as of yesterday, right? So we would like to maybe get those emailed into the staff. I don't think that it's necessarily, I don't know if it's appropriate or legally okay to just read them off right now. So I would say the best course of action in my mind is let's make sure that those are emailed into staff so that they have them, that they've got full thoughts to review. But at this point, it has been voted on, motioned, approved, passed. So at this point, the discussion sort of does need to cease. So I would say, David, please, as thoughts continue, and we will have edits on this in the future as well. So I'm sure that this will come back at some point for edits. But in the meantime, I would encourage David to email any thoughts that you feel were underrepresented or misconstrued or left out altogether. Let's get those emailed into staff for your knowledge. Okay. Well, thank you guys. This was a, tremendous amount of work. So thank you guys very much. I'm glad that we have something to move forward. And at this point, we're going to move forward with item number 3 on the list, the approval of minutes, draft architectural review board meeting minutes for February 6, 2025. Do we have any items there that need to be corrected or adjusted? Board Member Balte, I see you gearing up.
Yes, I'm looking at this. In that meeting, a member of the public, Martin Bernstein, asked about us putting a condition of approval regarding the back alley for construction. I'd like to know if that is something that we picked up on, because it was not explicitly part of our motion, but I would say it was implicitly intended to be.
We did pick it up and we did include a condition related to that.
Thank you so much. That's my only comment on that.
I have a minor correction, if I may. It's on page 145. 5th paragraph on page 145, Mr. Galbraith explained it was a flush fault, not a flash fault. Very different things. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
A question for my fellow board members here. What is a C-canot wall? S-E-E canot,
A secant wall? Can you tell me which page?
page 828,
Packet page number?
packet page 28.
A secant wall is a type of design of where you're designing something to exclude like the water when you're doing basement
David
design.
is looking at the minutes earlier in the packet, which we're not addressing today. It was in the confusion of stuff for the previous item.
Oh,
He's
okay.
referring to the project that created a C note, which was intended to be a replica of a Mayan or
Cenote.
a cenote, sort of a
No.
depression in the ground.
C-canot, this here? That's,
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
yeah.
Oh,
C-canot.
so
Yes.
It says
to get everyone on the same
Emily
page,
intended for it to be a secant wall. Yeah,
packet page 28, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6
I'm sorry, you're right.
paragraph down, Chair Balte asked if they decided to construct a C cannot wall or a drawdown. And I think that's supposed to be secant wall.
Secant?
S-E,
It's SECANT.
Yeah. Good catch in the minutes from previous time, David. How did we miss that before when we approved those?
And for future reference, if you do catch things like that or other corrections to the minutes, please feel free to email them into staff ahead of
Perfect.
time. And then we can send a revised version out for everybody to review in advance of the meeting.
Good catch, David. All right. So with that, I move to approve the rest of the minutes from February 6, 2025 with the slight adjustment of flash to flush. And noting that Martin Bernstein's item was covered.
Second, that,
Okay.
seconded by Board Member Adcock.
There we go. Call to vote?
Board Member Adcock,
Yes.
Board Member Balte,
Yes.
Board Member Hirsch, Vice Chair Chen,
Yes.
Chair Rosenberg.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
All right. Last item. We have board member questions, comments, announcements, or future meetings and agendas. And I do believe that Claire has something to speak on during this time. 824 San Antonio? Or was that earlier?
We did
Already
cover
said
that.
earlier. Check and check. Okay, perfect. So to my fellow board members, any other additional questions, comments, announcements, future meeting agendas, any absences, anything else?
Yeah, I have one more question.
Please.
Since I put in this effort of work on townhomes,
Mhm.
am I permitted to, since it's been voted out, can I share this with my fellow board members?
Pardon?
What is it you would like to share? Since, your documentation, would you be allowed to
Yeah.
email that out?
Yeah.
Um,
You were suggesting that
looking over here,
I
email to
send my
staff.
notes to the staff.
Yeah. It
I-
would violate the Brown Act, I believe,
Yeah.
because you can't have, you can send it to staff, but you can't send it to all of the fellow board members.
Right. I would recommend that you share it with staff and we can have it in the file as part of this discussion. And then if it does come back to the ARB, it may be,
So
could
if
be
it,
included at that time.
you mean, I can't share it with others. You've spoken up?
No,
Can-
can't.
can you
It's not
explain?
5 feet.
Can you explain that to me? Why?
So the concern is that if this is an item that might come back to the ARB at some point in the future, we don't want kind of discussion outside that process.
It's a hypothetical. We just voted, the issue's done.
Yeah,
Brown Act
the
applies.
issue is done. Haven't we voted that way?
Our city attorney is recommending against sending that to the board. But we can look into it. If you would share it with staff, we will confirm. And if it is acceptable, then we would share it with the rest of the ARB.
You'll let me know that.
We will look into it.
Okay, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you guys very much. Really appreciate all your efforts. And again, special kudos to David and to Ying Shi. Thank you guys so much.